Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. Molly was born a sickly, weak little girl. And when old Grandma Nancy looked at her, she immediately said, "Not a survivor." "Grandma Nancy, what are you talking about?" said Vanessa. Grandma Molly quietly stroked her daughter Wendy's head. "The girl is weak. But so what? We're not all such great men now. And remember, this is after the war. What's there to look forward to? Yes, the time after the war is hard, and everyone needs women. How many of our girls had sons on the field and turned around, and the neighbor went home?" Wendy Ottensova gave birth to a daughter without a husband, having spent only one night with a pilot. "Yes," nodded the mother at her, but the daughter only waved her hand away. She realized that there were few men left after the war, and those who returned were, so to speak, worth their weight in gold. So having sat in cellars a little, Wendy decided just for herself to get a baby. What else does she need? Nothing. Just to feel like a mother to her child. And after all, it's always the continuation of her lineage. "But you wanted her to go out," the mother once said in a fit of anger, because she realized that there was one more lineage in the family, and they cannot pull. "Mom, didn't you raise me without a father? You gave birth to me unmarried, didn't you? Or have you forgotten?" After that, Vanessa just kept quiet and didn't say a word to her daughter. That's true. She gave birth to Wendy, too, by a soldier. But Vanessa was a poor but noble family and knew her lineage almost to the beginning of the reign of Tsar Gorak. And then some obscure abrek came here, wanted her daughter, and that was it. You can't even get alimony from anyone. A daughter. How are we going to live? That's all my mother asked. I work at the bread factory. I work day shifts at night. I can take a part-time job as a watchman. You'll help me. We'll see if we can get the baby back on its feet. What's Molly's father's name anyway? Michael. He's just Michael. The mother just nodded her head and agreed, but not as eager as she could have been. And what happened after the granddaughter was born? Wendy worked 2 jobs to feed her family and buy wood for the furnace. But her health was failing. A cold that started with a trivial fever, then a cough, and then they took Wendy to the graveyard. Wendy to the graveyard. They buried her as best they could. Vanessa herself did not know how she would pull her granddaughter alone, because she was already 3 years old at that time. Don't worry. You're working at the bread factory, aren't you? You'll get by just fine. You'll give her to the kindergarten at the factory. Everything will be fine. That's what the local neighbors said. But Vanessa realized that her money and even the ration cards she received at the factory might not be enough. But gritting her teeth, she went to work every night, knowing that her Ukrainian granddaughter was the only one left at home. All that was left of her Wendy. Tears choked the old woman, for she herself reached out and tried to help everyone. "And these, you see, I get a lot of money. I wish you'd all go to hell. What I get, I give back to you, you bastard. And you're just looking for a way to get more. And stab me with my own piece." But the woman realized that she should not give up. After all, who would the little girl be left to? She was only 4 years old, but the little girl was beyond her years. Intelligent and smart, began to talk early. She understood everything, was not capricious. Vanessa, she was the only thing that kept her on this harmful light, and so probably would have gone to the dust by now for her daughter. And the higher powers saw it in a woman to live for another 5 years and to raise at least a little on her feet little girl to send to the 1st grade. Vanessa maybe will register the little girl for permanent residence. The director of the boarding school had known this family for a long time and tried her best to help the grandmother and her granddaughter. "It's like Jenna. You don't think I can feed her. She's dressed as well as anyone. She's not newer, but she's not starving. She may have potatoes and bread and whatnot. But you can see for yourself that she's a girl and cheerful. No, you understand. I don't doubt your strength, but the girl will be better off here. 3 meals a day, and we get new clothes from the factory. And I've put together, so to speak, what I could before Molly's package. The uniforms are new, don't you think? And some more of my kids' stuff I'll take care of. Thank you, Jenna, for caring. But you know, home is always better than that. When I'm dead, don't leave my baby behind. And Grandma's words were prophetic. Having finished the first grade, Molly and her grandmother were happy that the girl showed the best results in school. Vanessa rejoiced that her daughter had disobeyed and had given birth. And she's an old fool, almost a grandmother. Don't cry. Who hurt you? No one, granddaughter, no one. It's me who's happy about your success, and the fact that God has allowed me to live this time to admire you. Why don't we go to your mother's grave this weekend and visit her? Come on, Grandma, I learned the news at school. I'll tell her. Let her hear it in the next world and be happy. That's how it was decided. The weather was surprisingly nice that Sunday. It wasn't as hot as the day before. A light breeze. That's why it was easy for grandmothers and granddaughters to walk along the beaten path to the edge of the city. And here is the pogost. The first crosses are already looking beautifully. This is where I be buried, thought the old woman, but immediately chased away such thoughts. There's nothing to think like that. She has a child in her arms, and smiling Vanessa stroked her granddaughter's head. Grandma, I'll give my mother a field of cornflowers. Let her enjoy the flowers. Okay, granddaughter, but I won't go far into the field. Just over the road here, pluck them for me to see. I was an old lady watching Molly pick wildflowers for her mother's grave. She had long been invested with doubts, should the girls speak, or wait a little longer. About the old warehouse bricked up in the wall of her old barracks. Vanessa was moved there almost immediately after the revolution, along with her parents, and they managed to grab a few small struggles in their haste, along with the family jewelry and a small bag of Tsarist coins. The family had stashed them in an old niche that had once been a heating vent. It was good that it was not used at that time, and that's why it turned out to be a wonderful hiding place. Vanessa knew about this stash, as well as her mother's and father's instructions before his death, that all this stuff should be taken only in case of emergency. Vanessa, I got you jammed by God. Sell jewelry only in case of emergency. Or better yet, don't touch it at all. Mommy, I understand. But if things get really bad. Vanessa, just so you understand what your mother said, I don't mind you selling it, but it's your legacy. You're the heir to a noble, albeit united, family. And I hope that this red scourge in the form of the Red Army will die out in due time. And then Mother coughed in another fit, overcoming his illness. Then you'll be able to claim your ancestry. Your great-grandmother was an empress herself. Mom, we're going to be fine. Well, we're not. Her mother died, as well as her father, from tuberculosis, leaving Vanessa to live in a communal apartment. The girl was already an adult and had the best education, so she easily got a job as a German teacher in a school and worked there until her old age. But now she had to go as a night watchman. Well, thank goodness Molly's talking or not. What about the treasure? Since her father and mother passed away, and she only took one antique ring from her daughter. My daughter needed the money for her medication, but that didn't help either. And now to tell them to a small child, even one as bright as Molly. The old woman sighed heavily and pushed the wicket gate of the local pogost, almost half abandoned, about there being a local watchman, someone to watch over all the graves. It was out of the question. Just her and a few other parishioners who came here to see their dead. That's all. But hello, Evelyn. Molly and Molly are here to see you. Your daughter's coming over. She's gone to pluck some daisies besides cornflowers. And I'm not here yet. I want to consult with you. And the old woman sat down on an old ruined bench. Fix your handkerchief. She used to talk to her dead daughter like that at the grave. And the amazing thing was that Evelyn often came to her in her dreams and even gave her hints on what to do. That pleased Vanessa. It meant that her daughter could hear her, even in her dreams, but she was communicating with her. You realize, Evelyn, what's the matter? I can already feel my own demise. I'll see you in the next world soon. I'm not worried about Molly. She'll be fine. I mean, the principal of her school promised me she'd look after her. If anything, they'll put her in an orphanage or a boarding school. But should I tell her about the treasure buried in the wall? She's young and foolishly childish. She might have said too much. But to leave them to their fate like that. It's an old house. It'll either collapse or be torn down. And I won't last forever. What do I do? Give me a hint. But at that moment, Molly ran up to the grave and put a bouquet of daisies and cornflowers by the headboard. The girl was dreaming of running, and her braided tassels and hair glistened gold in the sun. Here, Mom, I brought you some wildflowers. Grandma says, do you like them? Grandma, what did you want to talk to Mom about? She's writing to her. What kind of gas? She hears everything. That's later, when my mother gives me an answer in my dream. Let me tell you. In the meantime, put some cakes on your mother's grave. Let her soul eat them. And the old woman handed her granddaughter 2 poppy seed cakes. Evelyn loved them very much when she was alive. Let her eat them like this. Vanessa wiped her tears. She shouldn't have shown her weakness in front of her granddaughter, or upset the child. And so the 2 generations sat on the grave, embraced and listened to the silence. Bird song and the wind slipping in the trees. Well, granddaughter, you've seen your mother, so let's go home. And you, Evelyn, rest. We won't bore you, and I'll be waiting for you in my dream tonight. You really only put your granddaughter to bed. And went to bed herself, as she immediately went to sleep. And so the woman sees her Evelyn Wushu. She is standing on a hill where their old house can be seen and points to their own windows. And then the house collapses, and in its place a high-rise rises out of the ground. So fast, and on top of it stands Molly. But the strangest thing about Molly is that she sees her not as a little girl, but as a grown-up lady, and so beautifully dressed. Oh, Lord, have mercy, Vanessa said, opening her eyes. But thank you, daughter. I guess I should tell you about the treasure, and I guess you can see it from up there. How will our Molly live? She got up and crossed herself in front of the icons, looked at her watch. Wow, she fell asleep at 400 hours. It's time to get up before tomorrow to cook the stove to stoke and feed the baby. When the table was set, the grandmother twitched something behind which stood the bed, granddaughter, and lightly stroked her hair. Get up. The pancakes with jam are ready. Grandma, why such luxury? I can make my granddaughter happy once in a while. And we have a conversation to have. The girl quickly jumped out of bed, slipped her bare feet into slippers, and went to wash her face, when gradually and stroking grandmother and dress was put on, and her hair was invented into 2 tight braids. Mo, as she was called by her household, Molly sat down at the table. There was no limit to her surprise. There was homemade milk and pancakes on the table, her favorite raspberry jam, eggs. Grandma, where's the money coming from? That's none of your granddaughter's business. You'd better eat something. And then we should talk over a cup of tea. When the girl had eaten and Vanessa poured herself a cup of tea, she sat opposite and thought she didn't know how to start. But she realized that her days were numbered. And she had to start this difficult conversation. Molly, you're a girl, smart, and almost an adult. So understand me, you may soon be gone, so you may be alone. Grandma, what are you talking about? I'll marry you, and you'll take care of my kids. God willing, girl, but you'd better listen. Here the woman stood up and pointed to a place in the wall, above which stood an unmarred typewriter. Hidden in this wall are the family jewels, the coins, and they were left here by your great-grandfather and great-grandmother, and strictly punished. I'm not to touch them. I only took out an antique ring once and sold it to try to cure your mom. Grandma, why are you telling me this? My little girl, my mommy and daddy told me that this is a treasure to be treasured. It's not just gold. It's magical in a way. You see, Molly, these jewels are our legacy, a gift from the Empress herself. and they'll be used to admit you to the nobility when you grow up. It's like your passport, high society, and you'll be able to take your proper position in society without the miserable existence that the revolution has brought you. Grandma, don't interrupt me. I know what I'm saying, so now I'll get to the most important thing. Do you know where the treasure lies? And when I'm gone, don't tell anyone about it, and don't talk about it now. Do you understand me? Yes, Grandma, but I don't understand. If I die, you have to stay here and keep the treasure. Emily sat back and nodded understandingly, but she really couldn't understand why she was telling her all this, because her beloved grandmother would live for a long time. Though the girl listened attentively and tried to understand everything. Grandma, if I can't cope. This thought had already crossed her mind, and the woman just did not know how to act. She really realized that the girl might not be able to cope with the task, though on the other hand, she couldn't just leave the treasure in the wall and not tell anyone about it either. Vanessa kept thinking about this question when her heart first seized up, and she realized that at her age it might fail. I'm sure you can handle it. After all, one thing you have to realize is that this is your pass to the top, your ticket to better things. If not, you'll have to live not as a princess, but as a working girl. But if you do, you need to rehide them. You agree? She knew her granddaughter's character well, and if you get her interested in something, the girl would do it. And now she hoped that Molly would be able to keep the secret of her family, and in the future she would be able to proudly declare her family, and I suppose, her status in society, and a clan that would not be forgotten and would not fade into oblivion. Molly smiled and nodded her head. She understood her grandmother perfectly well, loved her. That's why she made a vow about herself. With all her might she would try to fulfill her errand. But apparently, having freed herself from the mystery that oppressed her, Vanessa had already gone down with high blood pressure by evening. It must be nerves, she thought. I'll take some pills and sleep. And then, God willing, I'll get up early. Although in the morning in the house, there was a grief Vanessa gave up at 0 o'clock God's soul, leaving on this world little Molly. Getting up in the morning, the girl did not hear the usual footsteps of her grandmother, and the room was cool, and on the table was not her usual simple breakfast of porridge and a glass of milk. Grandma, I'm up, where are you? Molly shouted loudly. But when she stepped out of the partition and into the main part of the room, Vanessa was sitting in a chair near the window, her head tilted to the side, staring at the wall with open eyes. Molly almost shrieked, but clamped her hands over her mouth in time, and she remembered all too well her grandmother's admonition to stay in this house with all her might. But what was she to do? She just didn't know. After all, she was just a little girl who had been left a complete orphan one morning. Molly stood and silently cried, not knowing how to be, what to do. The girl approached her grandmother, began to shake her quietly by the hand, but this did not revive the old Vanessa in any way. From such a stupor, she was brought out of such a stupor by a knock at the door and knocked neighbor from the next room, loudly calling Vanessa. But Molly did not open the door. If anything, she would say later that her grandmother was at the market. She instantly realized that something had to be done with Grandma's body, but with her tapes, that she could only lower her to the floor, put her under the window and cover her with a blanket. Molly quickly spun Grandma's body down on the floor, covered her with the blanket, trying to lay her closer to the window with her small hands. She folded her arms and closed her beloved grandmother's eyes and cried involuntarily again. After all, it is difficult to survive such a thing. An adult is not like a child. After that, the girl carefully left the room, closing it on the key. Molly, where is Grandma? The words of the neighbor sounded like thunder. Grandma went to the market, she said quickly, and promptly jumped out of the old barack. Molly raced to the cemetery where her mother was buried, for she simply did not know what she should do next. And now, sitting on an old bench near her mother's grave, the girl cried and complained to her that her grandmother had died, and now she was all alone. Mammy, I just don't know how I can go on living. The grocery cards are enough for a month. Grandma has some money, but she told me to keep our family treasures." The girl cried, and when there was no strength left at all, she quietly slid down to the ground, curled up in a ball, and clasped her knees with her hands and fell asleep. She slept until almost evening, and then she got up and went home quietly. "Molly, where have you been, and where is grandmother?" Insistent neighbors tried to talk to the little girl, but she persistently kept silent. "It's all right. Grandma went to a friend, and I stayed here. Keep an eye on me." "Schoolteacher, you're sure about that?" The neighbor looked at the girl strangely, but she didn't want to get involved. This whole family was weird. "If you need help, you're welcome." The girl nodded her head and quickly headed to her room. She found money and cards for groceries. She started to buy and prepare food herself, but she tried to avoid the body under the blanket. But she realized that she could not go on like this for long, although she did not know how to be. But the neighbors saw the little girl herself going to the market to store, and the once caring Vanessa simply disappeared. And so at the next meeting of neighbors, it was decided to break into the room of old Vanessa and check what happened there. The absence of a neighbor. A strange odor was coming from the room. The child's behavior alarmed everyone who lived in the house and yard. "Vanessa, Molly, open up. It's your neighbors. What's going on?" The girl jumped out of bed, rushed around the room, did not know what to do. If the neighbors suddenly found the corpse of her grandmother, she would be put in an orphanage. And there, according to stories, she would be beaten and starved. But most importantly, she would not be able to keep her grandmother's word and preserve her own legacy. At that moment, the knocking on the door stopped, and a commotion was heard behind them. The girl did not know what was going on, so she tiptoed to the door and listened. Soon Molly heard the voice of their local Uncle Michael. "Vanessa, open up, please." "Molly, girl, can you hear me? I know one of you is definitely home. There's a strange odor coming from under your door." The policemen began to listen, but heard only the stomping of children's feet running from the door. Aha, so the girl is home and most likely alone. Where's Vanessa? It's not like she could leave the little girl for that long. Gotta break down the door. The policeman waved to the locksmith Stepanovich. "We must carefully open the door so as not to damage the lock. Otherwise Vanessa won't get off me later." The locksmith nodded understandingly and began to carefully open the lock. "Which one? What kind of lock is there?" "A flimsy lock, which can be opened with a simple pin." When the locksmith and the neighbor entered the room, the smell of death hit them in the nose, and before their eyes opened a picture on the windowsill. In front of the open window sat crying Molly. "My baby girl. What's wrong?" A kind-hearted neighbor, with whom old Vanessa was more or less friends, rushed to the girl. But when she took the crying child off the windowsill and cast a glance at the body covered with a blanket, she immediately realized everything, shrieked. She immediately pressed the child's head against her shoulder and turned around so that she wouldn't see it. But what was there not to see? It looked like she had been living with this nightmare for almost a month. Here it was already. "Yeah, where had Vanessa gone?" quietly said the precinct officer, who walked over to the body and lifted the bedspread. "No wonder she'd been gone for almost a month. How on earth did you live, baby girl, next to the body?" He looked closely at Molly, whom he had known since birth. Yes, in fact, as well as her late mother and grandmother. And just shook his head. "Call the paramedics and the investigative team. Don't take me to the orphanage, I'll be lost there." Molly's voice sounded especially loud in the silence. "Plushenko, do not worry. You are still. No one is not taking you anywhere. No one. But the girl has to go somewhere. She can't live here by herself." The investigator realized the absurdity of the situation. But what to do? "Why are you clamoring? Let the little girl stay with me for a while." The neighbor, who took the first girl in her arms, immediately made a decision. "Let her live. She has enough space, and money to feed another family is enough. And then look, you can and claim for this room. It will be just right. A place for my son to live if he decides to marry. Are you sure about that, Camille? The policeman knew that the girl would be better off here than in an orphanage. But that's none of his business. Let social services handle it. Yeah, I'm sure. I work with my son on bread at the factory, so it won't be a problem to feed her. All right, take the little girl in for now, and then we'll decide what to do with her. Decide what? I'll take custody and that's it. What's that orphanage gonna give her? She's just a kid, and she's not very bright. Molly was a smart girl, and she knew she could stay here. That's it. The main thing now is to convince Aunt Nadia to keep her. And let everyone think what they want, but she really need to stay in this room or next door to look after the ordinary treasures. Molly clung tightly to her roommate's neck and cried, nervous overstrain, and the morning situation itself did not have the best effect on her psyche. She quickly picked up the baby and took her to her room, asking her to stay here and she would come back. Molly, I'll be right back. And what's up? And how well the girl wiped her tears and nodded her head. She realized that now her fate was being decided and she had to stay. There was nowhere to go. Camille returned to the old Vanessa's room and caught the moment the body was being carried out of the room. At that minute, a piece and an arm slipped out from under the bedspread. At what she saw, the neighbor cried out, "Aunt Camille, don't leave me." Vi voice running from Molly's room made the woman turn away from what she saw. She hugged her little body tightly and pulled her close to her. "I won't leave you, sweetie. Don't worry." "Why did you leave the room? You promised you'd stay with me." "Can I have my doll?" "It's on the bed." "Molly, wait for the coroner. He'll leave and you can take it." "I don't think so." "Let him take it now. The precinct says." We then print the room, and no one will go in there until the investigator gives the okay. And at the house service, they'll register the room for her. Then the room will be in the girl's name. Camille didn't hide her joy, because she could get custody of her. And then yes, by law, she is the heir to the room, and no one can claim it. The neighbor nodded her head and smiled to herself. Molly had heard all of this as well, happy that she wouldn't be put in an orphanage and could guard the walled treasure. In fact, that's what happened. Investigators determined that the old lady died of a heart attack. The baby was given into the care of a neighbor, who did not hesitate and immediately moved into the room of the cat Vanessa, leaving her son. But Camille was not given to rest. 2 questions: why the girl is so afraid of the orphanage, and whether there was any inheritance left from Vanessa. Though she was a mean old woman, she was the scion of a penniless noble family. "Molly, can you tell me, please? My grandmother had something left, but not towels, but some jewelry and stuff." "No, Grandma had a ring. But when Mom got sick, she sold it, even though the doctor said we couldn't save her in time." "I see," but that answer didn't suit Camille. After all, she realized that only an old woman with a treasure chest could walk around with her head held high like that. But how could she know that? Emily might not even know that. Where does the old woman keep the treasure? I mean, who would tell a child that? God forbid she'd hang around or be dragged out into the light of day. But how wrong was she? One day after this conversation, Camille decided to carefully examine the room, maybe even tread the walls and floor. What if the woman you escorted the girl outside? Let her play. She had no business being out here. She gave her a potato pie and her favorite doll. "Go play outside. I'll take over here." "Okay, Aunt Camille. Why don't I help you?" "No need. What can you do with your little hands?" The girl nodded her head and looked askew at the woman. She certainly didn't like being chased out of her own room. But what could she do at that point? Molly took another pie from the table and swiftly left the room, directing her life in the direction of the old cemetery to her mother's grave. She wanted to feed her mother's soul, to grieve as her grandmother had grieved, communing with Evelyn's portrait. Well, that was nice. Apparently ran to the cemetery to see her deadbeat mom, Camille said, looking out the window where the girl had gone. She was really getting fed up. She's been eating out of her mind. There's no work for her. Just spend food on her, dress her with cards. But on the other hand, how will she get this room? She's just looking after this one. And then she'll think of something, marry her son and get married herself. And this one to an orphanage or something. Camille moved away from the window and looked around the room with her eyes. Where could the old rich woman keep her treasures? That Vanessa had gotten something from her, she knew for sure. After all, it could not be that the descendants of a noble family had not brought at least a handful of coins with them in the Revolution. But judging by the condition of the walls, it was impossible to make a hiding place in them. That left only the underground, and Camille began to knot her heel. The floor. But a thud indicated that there were no voids or niches there either. Oh, what the hell. Did you, Vanessa? That's the only ring I had. And I gave it to a dead man. And she even left that one herself. The woman, with vexation, then hit the floor with her foot, and so hard that a squirrel sprinkled from the wall of the stove. She didn't know where and how to look for the treasure, but she realized that they were here. Vanessa put locks on the doors for a reason, right? Yes, she also wanted to put bars on the windows. Then the neighbors still began to laugh at her. That say, you promised a noblewoman to steal from you. Though everyone for a minute wondered whether the woman was not for nothing. Guarding her room like that. Well, we should invite an apprentice. Let him check the stove too. Maybe he'll find something inside. Just who to invite? The woman realized that if you call from the outside and in the oven or chimney, really something will be, then certainly such a treasure will not be able to hide. You'd have to share it or give it to the state. I'll have to think about it. And the woman left the room, closing it with 2 turns of the key. Nice German lock. These foreigners know how to make them. They're flimsy, you can pick them with a knife and just open them. In these minutes, Molly reached the grave of her mother, next to which her grandmother was buried. The girl divided the pie in half and put each one on the grave. She sat down on the bench where her grandmother had sat earlier and began to communicate with her relatives. Mom, Grandma, I feel bad without you. True, Aunt Camille. She's nice, but Grandma, I remember your instruction and keep it safe. I don't tell anyone about the treasure. But I think my aunt guesses. Is that you, Grandma? Come to my house in a dream. What should I do? What to do? And the girl wiped the tears that mercilessly hail from her eyes. She was a little girl on whom the adults laid an impossible labor and task, and there was no one to consult with. Molly had friends, and even friends from among the yard boys who protected her from her elders, always treated her to apples. But that wasn't it. She simply had no one to talk to, and tormenting her soul with all her doubts. Okay, Mom, Grandma, I love you, but I'm going. I think Aunt Camille will be looking for the treasure hidden in the wall of the stove, so I don't have to leave the room for too long. And you'll pardon me if I don't come long, but I'll come and get you some food. And Molly got up and walked briskly home. But in her smallness and inexperience, the girl did not turn around and look at the place when she spoke of the treasure hidden in the wall of the stove, and her words were heard by ears to which the information itself was in no way intended, and a dark figure stepped quietly away from the thick bush and weaved its way down the old path. In this gatehouse, which had formerly belonged to the cemetery keeper, had taken up residence with Michael, an old front man. Michael had come from the front a long time ago and wanted to find his first and probably only love, but couldn't. He was told that Wendy had been resting in the graveyard for a long time. They even pointed out the grave. Since then, the man has been living in the gatehouse. He's been living here for 6 months now. He looks after the old graves sometimes, and he's waiting to see who's going to visit his Wendy's grave. Probably 3 months ago, the man noticed a poppy seed cake on Wendy's grave, just the way the woman liked it. Strange, who could have brought it to him? Good people told him Wendy's mother was still alive. Yeah, I think she is. She's got a little girl, a little girl, a little girl. And the timeline fits. Could it be his blood? But he was afraid to admit to himself that a lone wolf like that had a child. No, we have to look. Maybe it's not my baby. But the moment Molly came to the grave, all doubts simply fell away. The girl 1-in-1 was his copy of the same as his hair, almost red color, eyes and nose with a small hump. And the voice. No, it was exactly like his. But what treasure was the child talking about? It's weird. Did Wendy have untold treasures, and now they're all left to the girls? And who is this auntie? Camille. My God, is everyone after these cats? And nobody cares about the kid. She just walks from here to the other side of town like that. Where to? The old cemetery. No, we should definitely go back to Wendy's house and see what's going on. Apparently, the girl is Wendy and his daughter. And left alone, she's simply in trouble. But what about the treasure? He threw the cigarette butt under his feet and crushed it with his boot. He began to think about what to do. Should he go today or tomorrow? No, there's no need to be so hot. Reconnaissance. I'll go tomorrow morning. I'll look and ask. And then already. The man went back to the old lady and took his suitcase out from under the bed. He looked at the unpretentious stuff he brought from the war and his award-winning nagging. You didn't get much in Berlin intelligence. At least you could have nibbled one German. It's all right with him. You're not a thief. You're an intelligence captain. You shouldn't be in this line of work. And the man took civilian pants out of his suitcase and threw them on a nail by the door. Tomorrow, I'll have something to change into. There was nothing to show off the uniform. Already rare visitors of the Pogost began to pay attention to him. They might call the local police. Let them call him. He wasn't doing anything illegal. He stayed here because he had nowhere else to stay. His house was bombed, and the local military commission wouldn't listen. They said, you're not from here. You're not entitled to housing. Not even a corner. Go to your place. But the man, being a native of Siberia, came here on purpose to find his niche after so many years. He remembered her as a young and happy carcass with whom fate had brought him together at the train station and with whom he had spent only one night. The man's heart snapped because he was so afraid that she would not wait for him, would marry someone else, although everything turned out to be more prosaic and tragic. From the train station, the man rushed to Wendy's house, where he was simply put on notice. She died of a cold. Buried at this and that. And there's a mother and her daughter living in the apartment. Was she married? Did his heart race? No, she never was. She gave birth to a daughter by some soldier. That's all. A soldier. So she traded him for a soldier. What? Apparently, the love there was stronger, so to speak, until the grave. And the girl, but when she saw Molly's graves in the cemetery near Nancy, the man realized how wrong he was. This is the little girl of his blood, and he will try to do everything to adopt her, and then take her to his native village, to show his mother and prove to everyone that he is not an empty color and not an empty voice. In the village, Michael had long been notorious for not marrying, because he was not strong as a man, nor can he have children, though on the other hand, none of his battle girlfriends complained about his strength, and the fact that he couldn't have children, it came out by itself without consequences. And now he would prove to everyone that he had a daughter and was a copy of her father. The man smiled, and his soul became warmer from such thoughts. He lay down on the old bed near the stove and, throwing his hands behind his head, began to think, if Molly is his daughter, if she knows where the treasure is, then you can not only come home with an heiress, but also a rich man. Michael had heard many stories that the nobility after the revolution had managed to sneak away some of their wealth, and some even hid it so securely that there are still untold treasures lying in many caches. Come on, that's not the point, but it's for your education, my little girl. He lay there thinking about how he'd come home, how he'd show that little girl to everyone. He would build a house of solid logs, bring his parents there, and then give his daughter to the City Institute. Michael didn't even notice how he was hovering in the clouds. He fell asleep, but the dream itself was restless. He suddenly had a vision of Evelyn in his vision. She had never come to him in his dreams before. And now here was Michael. Save our child, save our child. She waved at him and then disappeared. The man woke up in a cold sweat. himself not realizing what it was. His heart was pounding frantically on his forehead. Large drops of sweat were oozing, and his breathing was cut short. Jesus, what a dream. He looked out of the window. It was already getting dark outside, so he had slept a long time. 6 or 7 hours. That's okay. The body itself knows perfectly well how much to rest, how much to sleep and eat and drink water. Although it's worth getting up, making tea and heating the stove. Summer is warm during the day, but the nights can still be damp and cool. Michael got out of bed and put his feet into his Kurzovi boots, went outside, looked around and took some large logs from the fields. He looked up at the sky and remembered his Evelyn, how he had missed her all those years during the war. And then when he returned to civilian life and started looking for his family. But everything will be fine now. He knows that. Warming a small stove, Michael put a kettle on the stove, threw a handful of automaton herbs in it. Thanks, Grandma, for teaching me. I won't forget you. I hope you'll help me bring my daughter back to her father's house. Having drunk the tea, Michael went to the doorstep and sat down. He took out tobacco and paper, rolled a wet duck, took a drag, and for a mushy plum. He looked at the duck and threw it on the ground. What an infestation! It had eaten through all the lungs. We must throw it. If there's a child in the house, you'll throw it yourself too. What child are you talking about? Honey. Michael jumped from surprise and turned around and looked at the real woman in front of him. Who are you? Don't be afraid, I'm Camille. He's just been going to the cemetery. My pupil girl is so light, and Molly has not seen. Camille didn't go to the cemetery for nothing. She looked all over old Vanessa's room, but she couldn't find any hiding place. Then it occurred to her that the treasure might be hidden in the cemetery, buried in Evelyn's grave, for instance. Not for nothing the old cargo from there often showed, not thinking long to feed Molly Koi-san. Woman, she threw her handkerchief and sweater and went to the old cemetery. What if? But as she walked, Camille realized that it was unrealistic to find treasure there. It's not an old crypt, not some funeral structure, but a grave. But it's true, she wouldn't dig up and bury the treasure every time. But she's already gone. It was worth checking out. Camille walked through the cemetery and decided to look in the old cemetery path. And lo and behold, sitting on the doorstep was a military man, smoking himself, a meek and talking about the baby. Talking. Camille realized that Michael had come here from the front to look for his family, Evelyn and his daughter. What kind of Evelyn are you looking for? Not the one buried next to Grandma Vanessa. Oh yeah. Michael stood up in surprise. He'd found someone who could tell his daughter about Evelyn and her life. So, who were you to her? Wasn't she Molly's father? Well, don't spoil it for her. I've taken custody of Evelyn's daughter. Her paperwork's all in order. But I wanted to check with Evelyn about the father. But she's dead, I guess. I saw the girl here at her mother's grave, and I understand her grandmother is buried here. Yeah, the little girl comes here a lot. When Vanessa was alive, she used to take her to the grave, and then she left after her daughter. I can talk to her, but that girl is Molly. If that's my daughter, I'll take her. Don't worry. I'm not gonna leave you alone. And if you want, I'll leave you Evelyn's room too. Believe me. Is it true? You'll take the girl. You're gonna leave me the room. As the baby's father, Camille grinned at the man and had already lost her hands. This was the solution to her many problems. She gets rid of an unnecessary burden in her face. Defke gets that coveted square footage. Yes, plus if the treasure is left in the room, Camille can easily search it from floor to ceiling, up to the point that the floors will tear to the concrete. The man himself saw the advantage of making a deal with Camille. She would know exactly who the baby's father was. Yes, if he could interest her with a ringing message, the aunt would have no problem giving him custody of the girl. Paternal custody. And you don't worry, if you help me, if you don't force me to give her rights, I'll leave her without even saying a word. Camille looked at him askance. He's not an alcoholic or a fool. He's a good-looking man. He wouldn't cheat. She did a quick calculation, all the odds, and nodded. So be it. The wool of the lousy sheep. Good, then let the girl stay with me for a while, and you get the paperwork together. What else do you need at social services? And by the way, you can't bring a house in town on your own. It's her cemetery here. Okay. Camille turned around and was to the exit from the Pogost, but stopping, turned back and spoke. I stopped by the other day. She did not visit the grave of Evelyn and old Vanessa. No need to show this strange occupant of the Pogost for now. Where could the treasure be hiding? And Michael's already forgotten about the treasure. I'm glad his suspicions have been confirmed, so he can take the little girl away unhindered. Hell, yeah. What about the treasure? He didn't even think of that. And this is Camille going on the attack. I don't know if she knows where it is. That's why she's keeping the baby for now. It's weird. But if the woman knows there's treasure in the room, and the girl knows exactly where it is, Molly's in danger. What do we do? Just walk in on your daughter and say, "Hi, baby girl, I'm your daddy. Let's pack up the treasure and go before I'm either taken to the Noof house or put in the penitentiary." No, you don't want to just do this out of the blue. We need to think this through. We need to do some recon. And then, the man sat down on the bench and began to think. He realized he shouldn't scare the little girl like that. And to begin with, it is necessary to get acquainted with her, but that would be tomorrow, and tonight to sleep. The man entered the house, and having closed the door on a bolt, lay down on a bench, covered with a warm overcoat. He slept that night, Michael restlessly. And no wonder. So much to experience, so much new information and discoveries. It's no wonder that sleep fell from his feet. The man dreamt of Nadia, strangely enough, pregnant little Molly. And the strangest thing was the old Vanessa, who he had never seen in person. Only on the cell phone picture, Vanessa was standing in the middle of the room in his dream, and he was pointing his finger at the sand latch. But what was strange was that he was asleep, and he could smell the smell of burning. No, it wasn't his, not the cinders in his dream. Michael jumped impetuously out of bed, and out of military habit, slipped his feet into his boots behind his eyes. There were puffs of smoke in the room, and the roof was crackling with tongues of flame that were just breaking out. How in time had he managed to wake up? Apparently, someone had either gotten under the roof or the roof itself caught fire from some unknown cause. He grabbed his field bag and sprinted outside before he fully realized what had happened. But Michael didn't see Camille looking at him from behind the bushes, who decided to check out the soldier who lived in the cemetery. She threw a torch on the roof and quickly hid behind the thick bushes, and from there she watched what this strange soldier, who had come from nowhere and intended to take her girl, would do. Yes, he wanted the girl, she believed. He wants the treasure. He's not gonna give me a room unless he canvasses. They've all been rented out. We've seen the likes of them. After the front, they come in, spin around, and then things, chickens and food disappear. Let him spin. He jumped out with his duffel bag. But you forgot your suitcase, so you're not as simple as you turn out to be, my good man. The woman saw the man wiping his eyes and coughing, and then the helper walked toward town. That's what you should do. In the meantime, I'll search Evelyn's grave for treasure, but there was no treasure, though the woman searched very carefully. Meanwhile, Michael threw his bag over his shoulders and walked toward town. Come on, with this road burned. So it would only speed up his relocation to the city. But where to go? Maybe straight to his daughter's house. He thought and headed for the place where Evelyn used to live, and he was not mistaken in his choice. When Michael approached the house, he stopped and looked around at the grandmothers on the benches, children in the sandbox. Everything as it should be in peaceful life. Patsana in the forehead, then play. It's nice. It's like there was no war, no grief and human suffering. And here's Molly with her doll playing alone without her friends. What can I say? Maybe there are no girls here, Maybe that's a good thing. So I'll meet my daughter without witnesses. And then how will the conversation go? Maybe she won't recognize her father, won't want to know or see him. Michael carefully approached the girl and quietly said, "Molly, it's you." Molly jerked at the voice of a strange man and looked at him carefully from under her forehead with her smart gray eyes. "Yes, my eyes are my blood," Michael thought and smiled. There are dimples in her cheeks, just like his narrow lips, a stern look, and eyebrows arched like Evelyn's. "Why did Aunt Camille send you?" "No, Molly, I wanted to talk to you. You realize I'm your daddy. My name is Michael. Your mom and I didn't know each other long, but then you were born. You're my daughter, you know." Molly sat on the curb and couldn't say anything. She understood what this strange man was saying, but she just couldn't believe it. After all, Grandma had always said she had no one. And if Grandma died, she'd be put in an orphanage. "I don't believe you," the girl shouted across the courtyard. Everyone heard her. "And now already playing noodles, guys," and sitting on the bench old ladies began to look closely at the strange man. Some of them even stood up and walked over. Little wonder what kind of souvenir wants to offend a child so easily. "Man, who are you? Why are you bothering our Molly?" The woman's voice was harsh. She was a species woman, and even at her age, she could easily hit anyone with a stick without looking at their strength. She looked at the man and realized she'd seen him somewhere before. "You're not the man who went to Molly's mother's house 9 or 10 years ago." "Yeah, that's me. It's just, I'm Molly's father, and I've only just managed to get here. I was wounded after the front, hospitalized, then rehab. I just recently found out I had a daughter, so I decided to come here, to come and take her with me." "Where were you when Evelyn was dying? When Vanessa was pulling a baby girl on her own bloodline? When Sophia died, the only one left, and the neighbor nodded her head at the baby girl sitting at their feet like an abandoned puppy. Yes, you understand. I only just now found out she existed, that I had a daughter. Not to mention the fact that there's grief here. I'm ready to make amends. You think that's the only place a penal battalion buys their guilt? No, I'm a captain, reconnaissance, so please be respectful. And yes, I am Molly's father, and I want to take her. And don't be afraid to take her room for yourself." Camille's voice sounded sudden, loud, and overpowered all the voices of the yard captives. "I'm the girl's legal guardian, and I won't let you take her. Come on, Camille. Weren't you the one who told me yesterday at the cemetery that you were ready to give the girl and her dependents to her legal father? But I have to give you Molly's room." Or was that not the case? The woman pressed her lips together quickly, not knowing what to say to that statement. After all, the fact that she had gone to the old cemetery had been seen by many. To deny it was to invite even more suspicion. "Yes, I did. But then I thought about it and decided, what if you're some kind of crook and you want the girl? For some obscure business. How can you prove you're her father? The baby's birth certificate only lists the potential father's name. I can see the birth certificate. Are you really my father?" Molly's voice sounded low, quiet, but everyone heard her question. "Yes, Molly, are you my daughter? Mommy probably said you don't have a father, but here I am. You look at me and yourself in the mirror. How do we look alike? By the way, she's from before the breakup. Well, your mom gave me this antique and magical pen mirror." And Michael pulled an antique mirror out of a duffel bag. It had a long stem made of golden metal. It glistened in the sunlight, casting bunny glints all over it. "Wow, that's right. Real gold," Camille thought to herself, and stared at the antique. "Must be worth a lot of money, huh? That bitch Vanessa. She said she had no money, and here she was giving away such things left and right." The mirror itself was made of real gold, and Evelyn gave it to Michael as a keepsake. Let there be something left of their inheritance. At that moment, the woman did not believe that they would be able to keep the wealth. The time was too hard and hungry. Although Michael carried it with him all through the war and in the post-war years without breaking or scratching it, now he showed it to his daughter. It's really my mom's mirror. My grandmother told me about it, although she always scolded my mother for giving the mirror without her permission. Well, it's true. You're a daddy. And the girl threw herself around Michael's neck, hugged him, and began kissing his stubble and floor and cheeks. The man simply could not restrain himself and also kissed and stroked his daughter's head, pouring tears, which did not shed for all the years of war. And what to hold back his emotions now? They had found each other and everything would be fine. Daddy, you won't put me in an orphanage for anything. We'll stay at your grandmother's and Mom's room for now. And then, citizen, show me your papers. The policeman was called by the neighbors. Not many people believed that Molly had found her father, or rather he had found her. It all looked too suspiciously good. Michael put his daughter on the ground and took the duffel bag off his shoulder. At the same time, he noticed with the corner of his eye how the policeman's hand twitched and reached for his gun. Yes, of course, the sergeant was in no hurry to pull out his gun. I'm from intelligence. Here are my passport and military ID. And he handed the documents to the policeman, who began to scrutinize them, checking the photo and the man's face. Yes, it looks like he really is a scout. Although on the one hand, after the war, there is no telling what kind of scum is coming into the city. But the policeman couldn't find anything to pick on the documents, and he asked what business he was in town on. Yes, you see, I was looking for my family, but I found only my daughter. So, citizen, let's go to the nearest police station. There we'll check your documents and the authenticity of your words. Maybe it's not your daughter at all, and you want to hurt her. But then Molly jumped into her father's arms and screamed, I'm not letting him go anywhere. He's my daddy. I don't have anyone else. I don't want to go to an orphanage. Don't listen to that girl. She's been living with her dead grandmother for a month. She must be out of her mind. When Camille said those words, Michael almost fainted. How could it be? A small child and lived next to a corpse for a month. It just didn't make sense. What the hell are you doing? Inhumans, how could you let this little baby live next to a dead man? Even the Germans couldn't do that. Michael just didn't understand how it could happen that he picked up the little girl in his arms like that and looked at the policeman, nodding his head. Come on, brother. Take us to your nearest station. We'll find a solution for these good neighbors. The policeman himself stood white as chalk from what he had heard. After all, even having been through the war, he could not imagine that in peacetime such a thing was possible. He nodded his head and led the father and daughter to the station. The girl put her arms around her father's neck and quietly moaned in his ear. Daddy, you really won't leave me. No, of course not, my dear child. I won't leave you. We'll live happily ever after in my new home. But don't tell anyone about the policy yet. There's a hidden treasure in my room with my mom and grandma. I'll tell you later. Okay, but don't tell anyone else about it yet. That's what my grandmother told me. It's my pass to a better life. It's okay, daughter, it's gonna be okay. Just don't worry. Already in the station, Michael and little Molly were given tea and porridge from the soldiers' canteen and sent to the office of the investigator, who was in charge of the case of the death of the grandmother of the girl's old Vanessa. Well, tell me, Molly, who's that with you? That's my dad. He's going to take me and Nadia away from the orphanage. That's good. But tell me, did Aunt Camille ever hurt you? Yes, she said all sorts of mean things about my mom and grandma. Then she threatened me that she would give me to the orphanage. That's what she said. The investigator was surprised by the girl's words. Camille seemed really kind and friendly. And now this. Yes, she thought I was asleep, but I wasn't. I was lying quietly under the blanket, and I heard everything. Aunt Camille said she was going to put me in an orphanage. Let them starve me there, because I'm bursting. And then I froze to death from the cold there in winter. But I have a daddy now, and I'll go with him. And where does your daddy intend to take the baby? I hope you have your own place. The investigator realized how serious and responsible this decision was. Don't worry, comrade investigator. I'm from Siberia myself. I have my parents' house. I'll come back with my daughter and build a log cabin. But you understand, while I have to draw up the documents for my daughter, so that I could get the appropriate certificate and write it in my passport, I may live where her mother and grandmother lived. It's on 7032. The investigator looked in the records of the deceased Vanessa. Yes, Uncle Investigator, Molly said quietly. Mom and Grandma lived there with me. Let Daddy live there. The investigator spread his hands. After all, there were no grounds for refusal. He nodded his head and made appropriate notes in the file. He turned to Michael. Let's do it this way. I'll take you home by car now. I'll get you in. We'll make sure everything's all right. You understand, Camille had custody of the girl as a neighbor, and she was already counting on getting this room. Don't worry, comrade investigator. I'll keep the room. Let her live and be happy. She has children of her own, and I don't need it. The only thing is, I ask you to let me sleep there a couple of nights. You know, I'll get everything in order, and then I'll go home. All right, then let's go. The explorer put on his cap and waved his hand at Michael, saying, Come with me. Half an hour later, Michael and Molly sat on the bed and heard Camille shouting indignantly. The woman, of course, was not too pleased that a stranger had thrown her out of the room with his presence and taken the girl away. And these are some kind of government benefits. And ration cards. Yes, how can you give him a child? Look at his face. Siberian. He's more like a convict on the run. Do you realize what kind of hands you're putting your child in? Aunt Camille, didn't you say you'd put me in an orphanage? How will you get this room? Everyone in the room fell silent. No one expected that a little girl who had experienced grief would just like that and say in the eyes of adult aunts something that not every man or grown woman can say. What do you know, you little brat? Do you know how much everything costs at the store? Do you know how much it costs to dress you? You didn't want Grandma and Mommy's room. You wanted the jewelry of our noble family. Tears spurted from the girl's eyes. She said all this in 1 minute because the very mystery of family treasures tormented her. And the grief she had experienced, the death of her mother, her grandmother, whose body she had lived with for almost a month. Camille's words about the orphanage did not have the best effect on the little girl's psyche. Little Molly sat and sobbed. She was trembling, and after a few minutes she simply fainted. Go. Call an ambulance. There's a phone booth behind the house. He gave the order loud and clear. The investigator realized how critical the situation could be. A few minutes later, neighbors and medics were already bustling around the house, carrying the baby in their arms and putting her in the ambulance. And Michael himself was not happy that he had stopped here, having started a quarrel with his neighbor. To hell with them, with the treasure, which in principle may not exist. Yes, the fairy tales of Irina's grandmother. Michael said quietly, sitting in the ambulance and holding the baby in his arms. They were taken to the first city hospital, which was the closest. After examining the child, the old doctor stated that she was emaciated. You understand, the girl's exhaustion is total moral and physical. No wonder your fellow policeman told me her story in brief, so I suggest you keep her here for a few days. We'll keep an eye on her, feed her, you bet. We'll examine her, and then we'll see. Thank you, doctor. But I'm not a colleague of the investigator. I'm just the girl's father. But in some ways we're similar. He's a policeman, I'm a scout. So in a way we are colleagues, and we work in different directions. Michael smiled. He was pleased with this doctor. It was obvious that the man was a professional in his place, so he could safely leave the girl here and go home, rest and eat. At the mention of food, Michael's stomach sounded treacherous, but he realized that now he would have to try to arrange his life for himself and his daughter. Are you hungry? The doctor asked and looked carefully at Michael and Molly. The girl looked carefully at her father, then at the doctor and nodded. She could hear her father's stomach churning and understood him perfectly. After all, she knew what hunger and cold were like. Loneliness. Even at her age as a little girl, Molly already understood what some adults didn't. She looked at the doctor and quietly asked if Daddy could eat with us. He's so hungry. And everyone laughed. Of course we can. Honey, come on, Michael. We're having porridge and meat today. I don't think you've had it in a long time. Already at home in Evelyn's room. Michael looked around carefully, set the duffel bag on the floor by the door. Front line have it. Yes, Evelyn, you left me a daughter and a lot of mysteries. I wonder if what Molly said is true, if there is treasure bricked up in the wall of this stove. He looked at the wall of the stove and figured out where the cache might be buried. Michael began to methodically and almost centimeter by centimeter simply knotting the masonry. The sounds were muffled, indicating that the masonry was intact and there was no void inside. The man was almost desperate to find what Molly was talking about. He waved his hand, but his military training did not give him the right to retreat. Okay, only a couple of turns left to go himself, Michael said, and set up a stool to reach the very ceiling. And indeed, the very masonry of the kiln brick walls went almost to the ceiling. Almost reaching the outermost corner, Michael knocked a couple of times on one brick and immediately heard the familiar muffled sound of a void in the masonry. Cannot be. Could there really be treasure here? But here was a strange sighting of a squirrel, untouched but scurried around a few times. Has this treasure been untouched for years? Michael stood on the stool and wondered what he should do. Should he break the masonry now and open the hiding place? But if there is nothing there, at least he will check this version and Molly's words about the hidden treasure in the wall stove, and will be able to quietly leave this room, filled with death, the city itself, and go to his homeland. So we should take a wooden hammer, swing it 3 pizzas, and all proceed to dismantle the masonry. But that's tomorrow. Michael carefully got off the stool and put it back in its place. He took a quick bite of something he bought on the way to the market and went to bed. He lay on the bed and thought about Evelyn sleeping here, or maybe her mother Vanessa could often sleep under Molly's side. How homey and warm and cozy was this? I guess that's how it should be in every family, where everyone loves and cares for each other. Tonight, Michael, strangely enough, dreamt of Evelyn. She was standing on the hillside and looking at him. The man smiled and tried to get closer to her. But as he approached, the figure of the once beloved woman melted and vanished into thin air like a ghost. He woke up almost at 5 o'clock, all in tears, not realizing himself why he was sobbing like a child. Evelyn, how much do I miss you in this life? Wiping tears with the sleeve of his shirt, Michael lowered his feet off the bed and tried to fumble for the slippers he found in the house yesterday. Strange. He remembered them standing right there in front of the bed. And now, after looking at them, Michael intuitively sensed something wrong. Yep, here are the slippers. But for some strange reason, they were in their usual place by the door. That's odd. Maybe I went barefoot and simply did not remember it. The man rubbed his eyes with his hands and waved his head, chasing the dream away. But if he had been barefoot, he would have remembered it, because the times when he drank ungodly were long gone. So he couldn't write it all off to vodka. Yesterday he hadn't even had a drop in his mouth. All right, the man thought to himself, and slipped his feet into his slippers as he walked barefoot to the threshold. Time for breakfast and run to the hospital to Molly. On the way, stop by the market and buy some milk. Later, an hour later, Michael, with a bag of apples and a liter bottle of milk, stood outside the hospital. The man looked up to the second floor where his daughter's room was, and oh happiness. The little girl was sitting on the windowsill, looking out for him, probably since the morning. Hi, sweetie. I'll be right up to see you. Michael waved to the girl. Hi. I've been waiting for you all morning. A few minutes later, Michael entered the room and hugged his daughter, breathing in her baby scent. I'm glad he has her. It's so good that he came here and found his daughter. Now he has a family, and he's not alone. You've been fed. Daughter, they gave us delicious pancakes. That's good. I brought you some apples and milk. You should drink milk. It's calcium. So let's have it while it's warm. Michael took out a bottle and poured thick and still warm milk into his daughter's cup, which the girl drank with pleasure in a minute. She set her cup down for him, and with a smile on her face asked her daddy, "Can I still need a girl? Mine needs one." And Michael gladly poured another portion into his daughter's glass, watching her drink with appetite. He watched and realized that he would do anything for his daughter. He realized that for his daughter's sake, he would sell his soul to make sure Molly grew up well off and never denied herself anything. He looked at her and stroked her head, delighted with her smile, the sparkle in her eyes, and the fact that at least now he could make up for lost time. "Thank you. It's popular to have such delicious milk. All right, Molly, you go ahead and get some rest. Build up your strength. Don't worry. And I'll go to all the authorities and get the paperwork done." Your daughter looked at Michael and grabbed his hand, afraid that he would leave and never come back. "Don't worry, my daughter is back and we will be together. You'll never go to the orphanage. Do you remember?" The girl wanted to remind her father about the treasure in the wall, but was afraid that she might be heard. But the father realized what was bothering his daughter and cautioned. He also put his finger to his lips. "I remember everything. You don't have to worry, sweetheart. Today I will go to social services and passport office, and in the evening I will stop by and bring you ice cream. Do you like ice cream?" Her daughter nodded happily and pulled her arms toward her father. Michael happily picked her up and kissed her and returned her to the bed. He had to go through the instances first and then sort out the personal clutch. Little wonder how much time he and his daughter had left. What if they could leave as early as tomorrow? And the neighbor Camille and her attention to square meters did not give rest. By lunchtime, Michael had already bypassed all the authorities and quickly formalized all the documents for his daughter. And in this helped not only his combat experience and the grip of the scout, but also tears and promises of promises. You can't do much to get your child back. Yeah, Michael thought. He'd never felt such happiness before. "Good afternoon, Michael. How's Molly?" Camille's voice, suddenly coming from around the corner, brought the man back to earth. "Well, if you're interested in her condition, and not in square meters, I can show you what room she's in. It's of interest to you. You took such good care of her." The woman pressed her lips together and said nothing, rapidly pushed into the entryway, tapping her heels on the wooden floor. "Yeah, you can't say anything. I'm surprised the kids didn't take after their mother. They seem like nice kids. All right, I'll just wish her luck in her quest and valiant endeavors." "Totally." Sama meekly walked into the entryway and went to her room. He had to sort out his documents, cook something tasty for his daughter, and visit her in the hospital. And in the evening, the man stood in the kitchen at the stove and thought how to quietly and discreetly dismantle the walls. After all, if you start banging in the evening, it will certainly attract the attention of neighbors. And if you do it right now, knock on the table first as if repairing it. And then already, "Michael, good afternoon. You can't help me." Klitschko's voice called him out of his thoughts. "Yes, Jenna, anything I can do to help." Jenna was a local Mali theater prima donna, performing at street concerts with numbers, singing, sometimes showing tricks. Michael looked at her and understood that Jenna was a person from the category of theatrical bohemia, and such concepts as hammering a nail into a wall or fixing a primus something incredible. "Michael, you realize I have a wobbly chair and I need to fix it. You can help me." "No problem." "Jenna, I can fix it. I'll just get my lunch ready and then I'll get started. Do you mind?" The girl smiled sweetly and, looking at Michael, asked quietly how Molly was doing. "If necessary, I can get medicine, groceries. You do not think anything bad. My fans are more than willing to help." "Thank you, Jenna." "Nothing yet, but I'll keep that in mind. I'll definitely come to your place sometime." She nodded and went to her room with light steps. It's not weighty. Within 15 minutes, there was already a cooked lunch on the table in the room. And in front of him was the very chair that should have been repaired. Inspecting the unpretentious piece of furniture, The man realized that simply rocked the nuts, which were terminated legs to the seat, but it was necessary to create the appearance of work and noise. So he frantically began to bang on the table. You can't think of anything for fun. It's a lot of fun, though. Maybe there really are jewels hidden in there. It will help him not only to help his daughter, but also to build the log cabin he's been dreaming of for a long time. Then he'll buy some animals and give his daughter enough milk to drink. So we've made a little noise. Now we can start the new wall. The man carefully took a stool and put it under the wall. Started just knotting the upper rows of masonry. Here it is the place where the wooden hammer wrapped around and into the rag. Made a thud. That's where the flower, scarlet, and Michael began to break the wall with clear blows, trying not to make noise. The brick was already old. Time is not sparing anyone, and it was not taken from this masonry, so it gave in easily. In the resulting hole, the man carefully squeezed his hand, and inside the niche felt the end. Yes, you can't pull out such a thing, but maybe it will be possible to open it and just pull out all the stuffing from there. Fumbling for the lock, which was surprisingly simple for a slit, Michael pressed it, and the mechanism easily threw the lid off. It couldn't be that simple, but immediately the man put his hand inside the chest and felt the cold metal. Well, there you have it, noble jewelry. Now Molly and I are going to make a life. And he stretched out a handful of chains and rings of clones. It all glittered with yellow metal and blinded the eyes with bright shimmers of precious stones. It was mesmerizing. Sure, he'd heard of all sorts of enchanted treasures, jewels enriched with blood, but this was really mesmerizing. Michael, you're all right. A knock on the door and a ringing voice brought him out of his stupor. Yes, Jenna, I'm sorry. I can't get it open. Hands in the grease greasing the screws on your desk so it won't snap. Oh, thank you. But I'll come back later. Come on in. An hour later, the man stood like a statue on a stool and listened to the steps of the theater prima donna, praying to himself that someone else did not come and knocked on his door. But there came the long-awaited silence in the hallway. Michael carefully got off the chair, quickly found a small bag, and poured jewelry into it. Nothing now, the rest of the gold here. And bricked up the wall quickly. Nothing for the neighbors to ask stupid questions later. Why the wall is broken in this place and all that. Michael quickly climbed on a stool and put his hand inside the chest again and started to pull out the rest of the treasure. There would be money to put his house on. The last thing Michael fumbled for. There was a large diamond that shone with the purest countenance in the sunlight. Just like a diamond from a royal crown, you can't show it to anyone. Let Emily grow up and decide what to do with it. Michael quickly hid the diamond in a bag, where already called knotted gold jewelry, got off the stool, and began to think where to hide it. But, as luck would have it, nothing came to mind, and time was running out. It was necessary not only to keep the treasure safely, but also to fix the hole in the wall. Aha, I guess I'll just hide the treasure in Molly's toy bear for now. I'll hide it later. Now we need to fix the wall and give this actress her chair. Quickly completing the task, Michael was just about to pick up the repaired table, just as there was another knock on the door. Michael, it's Jenna. I'm at my desk. The man opened the door with a smile on his face and placed a piece of furniture in front of her. You're in, my queen. Please test your chair to make sure it's sturdy and creak-free. And he theatrically invited the woman to sit down. She eagerly responded and sat down on the chair. Michael, giving the master chair, not only does not squeak, but stands firmly on his feet. How can I ever thank you? Jenna rolled her eyes theatrically and looked languidly at Michael. She realized at once that this man was not only handsome, but also with golden hands. And now in such a difficult time to find a good man in the house is difficult. And the fact that he has a child in his arms, so nothing. It's a good thing. You won't have to get pregnant and spoil your figure. I've got it all. I'll have chicken broth for tomorrow, please. I got some homemade chicken for the occasion. I can share half of it with you. Oh, Michael, you're not only responsible, But you're also responsible. That's fine. But then you'll have to come over for lunch, because I'll need to get some broth for Molly as well as myself. How's the poor girl? She's fine. She's not poor. I'm almost done with the paperwork. And then the man bit his tongue. What's he talking about? The old fool. God forbid. Now there will be unnecessary questions about what and how. He quickly said goodbye to Jenna and just put her out with a chair in the hallway, apologizing like a first grader. Jenna, excuse me, I have to change and go to my daughter's hospital. Having closed the door on a lock, the man quickly looked around the room, threw a glance at the masonry plastered in the wall, and thought that it was worth it, probably, to break the whole wall to make this place stand out. Quickly prepare the solution. Michael whitened the stove and opened the windows. Let ventilate the eggs, and only at that moment he saw Camille watching his windows. Camille, good afternoon. Would you like to come with me to see Molly at the hospital? I'm just about to go. The woman felt a twinge at the words. She'd heard Jenna come to see Michael, asking him to fix a chair, banging on a hammer, and then flirting with that theatrical puppet. Is her room being claimed by this Fifa? No. But when Michael defeated the sad wall and opened the window to see her watching him, Camille was frightened. She's going to get suspicious if she doesn't want to get out of the room. And she had every right to. Next time, I'm in a hurry. I'll bring you guys a delivery for Molly tonight, and I'll do some recon. What did you do in the room? Is everything in place? Sure, come and have tea on the floor and we'll talk. Tea for you. What about wasting sugar on her? I will. You didn't even give the little girl a handful of candy yourself, and everyone's looking. Everybody's looking for something. Maybe she knows about the treasure too. Then I can see why she's holding on to that square footage. Probably guesses that Vanessa might have kept jewelry in the room. But I'm ahead of you, Nadia. You don't want to get your hands on other people's stuff, especially if it's Molly's legal money. I'll use it to put my daughter back on her feet. After closing the door, Michael went to the hospital. The girl must have been waiting for her sister. She's probably sitting on the windowsill like this morning. You shouldn't keep a child waiting. Besides, he had every reason to make the little girl happy. The papers would be ready in a couple of days, and they could leave this terrible place. Michael, as he expected, saw Molly sitting on the windowsill. When she saw her father, there was no limit to her joy. And no wonder. With the death of her mother and grandmother, she had practically lost Camille. Not just to stay here in this house, but to have a family and people close to her. Now she had found a father. Michael was like she often drew him in her dreams, a brawny military man with the same hair, color, with white ride like her gray eyes and strong hugs. The girl did not even doubt for a moment that Michael was her father. She recognized in him by an inner instinct the kindred man who had come to take her to Siberia. She knew that it was cold there, that the land itself was harsh and not always welcoming to newcomers. But the girl gave herself a vow to conquer these harsh expanses. Just like now, she sat on the windowsill and dreamed while waiting for her father. I want to be a researcher, or maybe I'll be an animal doctor or a military officer like my father. She closed her eyes and mentally imagined how she and Michael would live in their new house, where she would have her own separate room, her own bed, table, and textbooks. Here in this corner she would put the floors of books, and here the table on the windowsill would surely be a red geranium. It was pleasant for her to think. To dream like this, and wait for her father. And here he would be. Molly waved her arms and almost fell off the windowsill. She was scared, but at the same minute she remembered that her father was beside her. He would always pick her up on his arm, even if she fell from the second floor. Molly, please be careful. Michael's heart clenched when the girl almost fell out of the window. He probably wouldn't have survived such a tragedy. No, he knew for sure he'd pick her up. But Daddy, I've waited so long for you. I'm here. Don't worry. I brought you dinner and Lopo's ice cream before it melts. How are you feeling? Good, Dad. That makes my little boy happy. Now listen to me carefully. I'm almost done with all the paperwork. Your birth certificate, where I'll be registered as your father. It's almost done. I'll pick it up one of these days. And there's one more thing." The man looked around carefully, afraid that he was being overheard, but he was alone in the room with his daughter. He got up and opened the door and looked around the corridor. "Daughter, don't worry. I found what you told me about." Treasure Molly almost jumped up on the bed, but Michael managed to pick her up in time and cover her mouth with the palm of his hand. "Don't scream or they might hear us," the man said. "I'm sorry, so there really was treasure in there. Grandma wasn't lying. And you're doubting your grandmother's word." Michael smiled and stroked her head. "No, not at all." The girl shook her head cheerfully, and only at that moment she realized that her life had changed dramatically. "Daddy, when we go to your place, I'll have a new school. Friends, of course you'll have a new school, friends, and a new home. You want to live with me, don't you?" Michael looked carefully at this lovely creature who had changed his life so suddenly. "Very much." A week later, Michael and Molly packed their belongings into 2 small suitcases and quietly left the room in the early morning. Michael scrutinized his temporary shelter once again, and for some reason, for the first time in his life, he crossed himself on the threshold. That was it. Now he could leave here and never come to this town again. He carefully, so as not to wake the neighbors, closed the door, locked the lock with 2 turns of the key, and put it under the mat. This was what he had promised his neighbor Camille, with whom it had been agreed that the room would remain hers. The latter, of course, was delighted. But even more, she rubbed Camille's nose in the fact that she would be able to find hidden treasures in it. But that was it. "Molly, we're leaving. Maybe you should have said goodbye to your friends and told them everything." "No, I'm an adult and I've made my decision. I'm gonna write to my old friends and tell them how I'm living with you in my new home, and they can come visit us later." "Of course they can. Come on, let's go back, and my Yaga is in. That's just what my grandmother used to call me." And Molly stopped and cried. For once, the child gave vent to her feelings that she had hidden inside for so long. What can I say? I mean, even a grown man couldn't handle it, and this is a little kid. "My daughter, don't cry. Maybe we should stay here after all. Have you thought it over?" "Yes, I already told you. Let's leave." And she took her father's hand and led him firmly into the street. Just like her mother, Michael thought. So sure, so firm in her actions. A copy of Evelyn. That's why he loved her mother. And now he couldn't get enough of his favorite child. But if the first step had been taken, it was worth going all the way. And Michael went to the sunlight for his little commander, as he later called her. What to say next? This is a different story, which has its own continuation. Very happy. And every participant in the story got his well-deserved reward. Camille got her desired room, but she never found the treasure, though she almost tore up the floors. True, she was able to successfully marry her sons and years later to nurse small grandchildren, in whom he did not dote. Michael, as he wanted, was able to successfully sell some of the jewelry, and for quite a lot of money to build a house and get a job in his native Siberian village forester. He loved these places, although many people said that it was a harsh land. But only here are born real heroes. He loved his work and his daughter, whom his relatives accepted with great joy. What can I say? The girl was just like her father, and appearance and character. Molly grew up and became a beautiful girl. Entered after school, which she graduated with honors in medical school on pediatrician. She dreamed of taking care of all the children of the planet, so that none of them could not experience what she experienced. She still often dreamed about her. Vanessa, who waited on the threshold of her room and sometimes waved at her. Her mother often came in her dreams and stroked her head. From such dreams, Molly woke up all in tears, but realized her mouth would always be with her in her legacy and future. Daddy, when I was little, my grandmother used to tell me that our treasures were proof of nobility. Maybe I should apply to the nobility society and get the status quo. Molly, You're all grown up and still going from Cinderella to princess. Dad, I'm gonna argue with you on this one. This is what my grandmother Vanessa wanted. So I'm gonna file the paperwork and include a picture of that necklace we have on it. By the way, glue, macaroni. This I read in an encyclopedia, the mark of a master jeweler who served at the court of the Empress. Yes, who, by the way, was shot by the revolutionaries. Daughter, maybe we should let it lie until better times, right? Emily didn't know what to do. She wanted to do her grandmother's will, but on the other hand, she realized that her father was right. Times are hard right now. Maybe we should just wait it out. Here you know that daughter Michael lived a piece of cutlet, which Molly cooked and continued. Graduated from college. You'll be almost 21. And then you can do whatever you want. Okay. The girl ate and thought, and realized how right her father was. Maybe it was really worth waiting until she graduated from the institute, and then time would tell. She smiled, and looking playfully at her father, suggested Paul. Let's go to the place where I grew up as a little girl. Molly, do you really want to do that? Michael almost choked on his fries. Daddy, I've been dreaming about Mom again. I really want to visit her and Grandma Vanessa's grave. You have no idea, do you? The man put his fork and knife on the table and put his head in our clenched fists. He thought about it. He had long ago made a vow not to remember the place from where he took his little girl, but to visit the graves. Okay, I don't mind just getting through the session. And by the way, I'm taking a vacation in July. We can go there, and then we can go to the sea. Let's do it the other way around. Michael did not understand, looked at his daughter, asking a mute question. How? First we'll go to the sea, and then to the grave of Mom and Grandma. Do you understand? Not Mom, not Grandma, have never been to the sea. And from there I want to bring them seashells and put them on their graves, so they can hear the sound of the sea in the next world. And then Molly couldn't take it anymore. She dreamt of her grandmother again, but now she was walking towards her, asking for directions with her mother, and they waved at her. How she wanted to run up to her grandmother's dress, like she did when she was a child, to hug her with her warm arms and stroke her head. Daughter, but don't cry. The man himself couldn't bear his daughter's tears, and at the mention of Evelyn as well, he soured. He stood up and paced around the kitchen, not knowing how to calm Molly and calm himself. Okay, let's do it this way. I agree. Just don't cry. I won't. I'm sorry. It just came on. Molly went to the bathroom where she was face again with cool water and looked at her reflection in the mirror. Here again eyes will be red until the evening, and she still have to go out with Tolik to dance. The girl fixed her hair in a braided braid and tried to smile to herself. How did she become like her mother? Molly thought, remembering the only picture of Evelyn. But I'm my mother's daughter. She went into the kitchen, where Michael stood by the open window, smoking. On the table was an empty shot glass and a cob, a bottle of cognac. Dad, what were you drinking? Michael himself did not like this business, but now he was so eager to drink just a shot, so to speak, and to memorialize the admirers, that while his daughter was in the bathroom, he could not resist, took out a sealed bottle of cognac from the refrigerator and poured himself a shot. Yes, sorry, I just couldn't help but remember our dead. Did you say the right thing about the sea? We'll bring them presents. Let them be happy for you and me. Everything will be fine with you. The train rushed and brought in a compartment of father and daughter, who were happy and tanned from the sea. Lucky, thought many people, and they were right. But the faces of Michael and Molly did not shine with joy. Each of them was thinking about their hometown and the days of death they had spent there. Molly, let me go and get you some tea with lemon. Yes, with lemon. Her father's voice brought the girl out of her stupor. She loved him very much and realized that he was having a hard time as well. Once she even stammered to him that maybe you father should marry a second time. You're still young. You're still handsome. But at that moment, Michael looked at her so much that Molly was silent for a long time. Look over there. and the man pointed with his finger to the hold on which Evelyn's picture stood in a beautiful frame. She was, and is, and always will be the mistress of this place. No woman can replace her. You don't count. And turning around, Michael quickly put on his jacket and shoes. He went outside. It was autumn, but he did not notice the passing rain, not the cold dampness that took to the bones. The man walked around town for a beat to o'clock, remembering Evelyn, but on the other hand realizing that Molly wanted to do him good. Returning home, he shouted Molly from the doorstep, "You're home." "Yes, Daddy. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you, did I? It's just that you love me and you want the best for me." Michael sat down on a chair in the hallway and began to take off his shoes. He quietly said to Evelyn's daughters over there, and he pointed his finger upstairs, "And you are here, you are my whole family and my happiness. Got it? And don't say that to me again. Put some tea on." That's how they lived. And now, standing by the graves of Evelyn and Vanessa, they were each thinking about something different. But now there was no sadness on their faces, only love. "Mom, Grandma, I brought you seashells and your favorite flowers, cornflowers, and for you, Mom, and for you, Grandma, peonies. Good afternoon, Evelyn, and good afternoon to you, Grandma Vanessa, and look at your granddaughter, beautiful future doctor. I didn't abandon her, as many people thought, but raised her to be a beauty." A tear traitorously rolled down to my eyes. The man tried to hold back, but could not. He put candy and cookies on the graves and walked away, wiping his eyes with a handkerchief. "Michael has become sentimental. Don't cry. Look over there." My daughter pointed to the sky. "There's a pair of white swans surrounding it. That's our Grandma and Mom, really, Dad. It can't be otherwise. Let's go to the hotel. It's getting dark. We have an early train tomorrow. Come on, Dad." Father and daughter walked along the country road. They were happy, the two of them, and each realized that better things were ahead. That night Molly dreamed of her mother and grandmother for the last time. They were standing on a hillock and waving to the girls, and Molly ran toward them with all her legs. She saw herself as a little girl for some reason. "Molly, wake up, daughter. You're dreaming and having a nightmare again." Her father held her by the shoulder, waking up to her screaming, "We should take her to the doctor." "Dad, Mom, and Grandma came to me in my dreams again. They often visit you in your dreams. Did they scare you this time?" "No." The girl wiped her tears with her hands, took a glass of water from the nightstand, and took a couple of sips. "They were saying goodbye to me. Daddy, I won't see them in my dreams anymore." And she burst into tears even harder. "Daughter, they will always live in our memory, in our hearts." They sat like that until almost morning. The daughter snuggled into her father's shoulder and howled sobs. And at dawn, Molly got up and went to the window and opened it wide open. "Daughter, I hope you don't do anything stupid." "I'm fine. I just realized that now I have to say goodbye to them too." I waved to the sun. She waved at the rising sun with both hands. She needed here to let go of her former fears and open like this window of her life to new accomplishments. Now she understood what her mother and grandmother wanted to tell her. "Thank you, my family. I will always remember and love you." They drove home, and all the way home, of the girl's face. Yes, she found her peace of mind next to her father in her new home and the town she had loved from the very first day. She looked out the window and imagined driving to her new life. Like when she was a little girl, when her father took her to a small Siberian town. Everything would be fine, the girl thought, and she was right. After all, everything in her life turned out in the best possible way. As her grandmother wanted, Molly became a doctor and the best pediatrician in the city. She successfully married a wonderful man and gave birth to 2 children, a son and a daughter, who was named Evelyn in honor of her mother. But she did not apply to join the noble society, reasoned that maybe it is not worth stirring up the past, and if I want to become a noblewoman, I can always do it. And now she met her husband from work, and set a delicious dinner on the table. Why stir up the past? Let it be there behind the threshold, and here will always be warm and cozy. Subscribe and click the bell. Behind this psychiatric clinic in the city, and in general in the region, have long been bad rumors, like what happens in horror movies, and Michael had certainly heard about it. And when his mother and grandmother found out that he is an excellent student, and a graduate of medical school goes there to work as an orderly, one of them waved his hands. "Grandson, you're the only man left in the family. Don't go there. Michael, you know I'm from an ancient noble family. I may not have 1 million, but I'll find the money to pay for your internship abroad." "Grandma, what money? What abroad? I have to make my own way, just like my grandfather." And the boy nodded his head at the portrait of his grandfather hanging on the wall. And indeed, Michael had someone to look up to. His grandfather was a famous surgeon, and his father, who died in Afghanistan, blew himself up on a mine, saving the military. And so he decided to become a doctor, but not a surgeon like his grandfather and father, but a psychiatrist. Why psychiatry? My mother joked in the first year of school, "But Mom, if the body my grandfather and father studied, so to speak, in detail, then psychiatry is a real field for research, a Klondike." Yes, you're a researcher. I hope. Psychiatry isn't contagious. Oh, Mom, don't worry. It's not like it's the flu or anything. Maybe I can find my own unique method of therapy for mentally ill patients. Yeah, and bring people like Chikatilo back into society. "So Adriana, please don't bring it up," said the grandmother, stepping in for her grandson. The case of this serial maniac was then on the rumor, and the whole country was following him. But the mother reacted too painfully to her. Michael understood her because her own sister Adriana, and his own aunt, the only close person, killed by an unknown assailant, and the culprit was never found. The investigator then said that it could be a maniac, but now in many women saw negative elements of society, especially if they stayed in such institutions as their own city institution for the mentally ill. "Mom, you are an adult, and you understand that it is better to treat such people, recognize them as sane, and then pass a sentence, than to spend money on them to keep them in such houses as ours for years, and you're still defending him." The mother was outraged, but she knew her son's temper. "Michael, you're just like your father, just as stubborn. All right, but don't complain to me about anything. Adriana, don't worry. My grandson will complain to his legal grandmother." "You mean me?" Betty gently ruffled the thick red curls of his favorite grandson. "Grandma, but I'm not a boy anymore. Not a boy, but not yet a husband. So listen to your mother, but also to me sometimes." So they lived in the old Tsar's house, where they had a 5-room apartment with its own fireplace and a large library, luxurious balconies, which still kept traces of the old stucco. This house was in the very center of the city, stood on a small hill, and was considered one of the elite in the city. For it, even many rich men and millionaires, even one criminal authority, gave crazy money for the family to sell their apartment. "No way," said Betty's grandmother, who was considered the head of the family and whose word was final. "This apartment will serve my great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren. So just stop asking me stupid questions like if I want to sell the apartment and leave me alone." That's all she said a few years ago to a city criminal mastermind. And strangely enough, but after that they really didn't bother them anymore. They didn't even start organizing invasion raids, as it often happened in those times. That's how they lived. Michael, dreaming of becoming a famous psychiatrist, and his mother and grandmother, whom he madly loved and idolized. No, there were girls in his life, and even an older woman, but he loved few. Yes, there was a crush, even a feeling like love, but nothing serious. He went on studying, falling in love, dating. Now he was interning at a psychiatric clinic in their town. Yes, they had talked the most horrible and heartbreaking up to the fact that their orderlies and doctors have fun with mentally ill beauty, but no one could prove it. What do you want me to do? Michael asked his old friend Benjamin, who told him all this. Do. I really have to go over the border, as my grandmother says. But you know, you'd have to sell the last of it. And what would I do in that prosperous Europe? And you realize their methods and ours are probably incompatible. So that's where it stands. I'm already used to the realities of our medicine and psychiatry, in particular, as well as methods of therapy. What's a handful of pills? I'd rather have a shot in the vein, or even for some freaks in general. Orbital lobotomy. You're a bloodthirsty. Benjamin, I'm way ahead of you. Aha. That's why I went into dentistry, so I could yank my patient's teeth with a vengeance. And the guy was soon making a grimace that made them both laugh. A healthy laugh. Crooked faces like first graders. It was normal. In their practice, doctors, they are such and black humor that help them endure the specifics and difficulties of the job. Often the lack of weekends when there is no one on shifts. And you do all the work for 3 people so you cannot die long, or even go crazy and become like his future charges patients in a psychiatric clinic. Yeah, Ethan, I probably should have chosen dentistry like you, and my grandmother insisted that my senior year I choose dentistry or gynecology. But that's just not my thing, you know. I see, Michael. Then you'll have to go to me for dental care and one of our girls for gynecology. I'll give you a headache. All right, buddy, I gotta go home. I gotta get ready for my first day of private dentistry tomorrow. I'm on the phone for now. Michael nodded, and after shaking hands, they parted ways. He had to go to his mental hospital tomorrow. Then, it was worth it to come home early, to pack a bag, and for once, not to sit in front of the TV until night to sleep. Already at home he had dinner and brewed himself a fragrant tea. Michael sat down at the computer, an old computer brought from Europe, but still capable of much computer brought to him under the order from a friend of his grandmother for his birthday. When Michael was in his 2nd year of study, and the guy's joy was unbounded. Grandma, this is a real treasure. Luckily, the guy had no limit. And now he sat down at the computer, started the system, and connected the internet. Yeah, the internet is power. The ability to communicate with the world, to learn a lot. And now he decided to keep his own electronic diary of his internship at work, including everything he saw and heard, what methods were used, and what the doctors achieved. Maybe I'll even write a dissertation based on this diary. Not many secrets this asylum hides. Is this your institution for the mentally ill? Grandma came into the room and put a tray with a huge tea and sweet spoons on the table. Yes, Grandma, I'm thinking of keeping a diary. Maybe I'll see something interesting, and there are strange things going on in your almshouse. Grandma, do you know something? Tell me, please. I know something. Betty sat down on her grandson's bed and thought about it. That sometimes I see girls and young women in weird outfits, but they also have ribbons in their hair. Grandma, well, the outfits are ordinary, hospital outfits. Maybe some suits came from humanitarian aid. And the ribbons? Maybe one of the nurses got sick. No, grandson, something else. Outfits. Grandma thought for a moment, and then said, you know, like in adult movies, a dress, short stockings, and netting. Somehow the guy raised an eyebrow in surprise. Strangely, he had passed by this place many times, but he hadn't really paid attention to the patients. His grandmother, on the other hand, did. She looked at her grandson carefully and then continued. And about the ribbons, you know, they're weird too. How can I explain it to you? Well, what caught your attention? Just tell me the first thing you noticed. The guy felt like a detective, but he was already wondering what his astute grandmother had seen. Betty pressed her lips together and then gave out. They're red with glitter. So what? Grandma, it's bright and beautiful. I guess crazy people like that. I don't know about that. You know, in my time, so to speak, pre-revolutionary ribbons like this were stuffed in the hair of girls of easy virtue in brothels. And here, they'd walk around like that, and they'd be highlighted with ribbons, so to speak. It's not human. You shouldn't make the poor and disadvantaged look like the poor and disadvantaged. Ugh. And also such ribbons flew hair only young and beautiful. Grandma, you're my Agatha Christie. Really, how many times have I walked by and just not paid attention? It's impossible not to pay attention to such an inferential outfit. All right. Well, I take what you said, and I'll pay attention. Maybe I'll uncover some kind of world conspiracy. And the guy smiled his beautiful smile, but he didn't know how close he was to the truth. This hospital was a place for the mildly insane. As the doctors would say, those who didn't require enhanced confinement. That's why the patients could walk by themselves in the equipped yard of the institution, awarded with a fence. But the guy would learn about it later, when he would encounter the most horrible and disgusting thing that could happen in his professional life. Monday turned out to be surprisingly sunny and similar, especially after a night of threatening rain and rain that walled the city. Yes, Michael thought, waking up in the night and looking out the window to rain like that could wash away the whole city and my psychotic charges with it. But the morning was clear and sunny, and there was practically nothing left from the traces of rain, except for broken branches and leaves on the ground. Yeah, it's a lot of work for a janitor, the boy said aloud. That's right, said the janitor of the Czech grandmother Sophia, who has been cleaning the yard. Since 5 o'clock, she's already cleaned so much, and still waving and waving the broom. Good luck to you. And the guy, throwing his backpack on his shoulder, went to his new place of practice. On the approach to the psychiatric clinic, the guy decided to walk around it a bit, on the other side, so that he could see the place where their patients usually strolled, and to pay attention to what his grandmother was talking about yesterday. Indeed, there were several girls walking in the courtyard, dressed in very revealing outfits with brightly colored ribbons in their hair. But the strangest thing was not only the orderlies, but also the head doctor and his 2 deputies were standing aside. They looked at their charges and smilingly discussed something. And the head doctor was looking at Kathy, a new patient who had been brought in a few days ago, a victim of hypnosis, or rather a failed experiment of the psychopath. A doctor who practiced his trance technique on her. Yeah, the guy thought. Such things happen in the practice of doctors. As the grief doctor told the law enforcers, this method he tried to muffle her inner hunger. What kind of hunger? One of the investigators asked the doctor. Sexual hunger. She was just obsessed with men, always wanting sex. I tried to bring her back to a normal life, although so far I had to cure her with this method by my refinement, to cure her. Or maybe it was just you decorating her like that. I was saving her from herself. The doctor was sure he was doing good. But, as Michael thought to himself, having heard the girl's story and the doctor's testimony, he was no less crazy than his victim, whom he had turned into a vegetable. Yes, thought the new orderly from one prison, or rather office, psycho, experimenter to the clinic, or rather, a study, a psycho, an experimenter in a clinic where she was looked upon as a subject of pleasures and possible molestation. Well, if you've got your eye on her, I'm gonna have to keep an eye on you, Kathy. Now I realize my grandmother was right about something. You don't dress patients like that. This isn't a catwalk, it's a clinic. Michael took out a pack of cigarettes and smoked, even though he'd only dabbled before. As his downstairs neighbor, Uncle Benjamin, who'd been in the camps for years, would say, he was translating product, also a colorful type. The guy remembered about him. But in reality, as he was an Urka and a political prisoner in the past owned such a 3-room apartment. Michael even once asked him jokingly, who will get your chambers and jacuzzi? To which he replied, squint your eyes at him. Don't be jealous. I won this house with my teeth. And the neighbor showed his not too healthy strong teeth. Don't look at my teeth. I can still do a lot. And the apartment is my mother's inheritance, not the state's. Believe me. Uncle. Benjamin, but you don't have children. Who told you I don't? I had a daughter, but she died in childbirth. So there's only one beloved grandson. But why doesn't he visit you? Where is he? Do you even know? Because he lives abroad. My daughter married an Arab. She fell in love and went to the Emirates. To tell the truth, she lived like a cheese in butter. I wouldn't give her that. But I guess you have to pay for everything. And I guess she paid the price when she gave birth. I'm sorry, Uncle. Benjamin, I really didn't know. Hold on. There's a grandson. Have you even seen him? Yes, he came to my daughter's funeral. To her grave, to be exact. She converted to Islam and was buried on the day she died. So I only got the grave. I'm sorry. You're welcome. My grandson's growing up and my daughter's husband calls me and shows me his grandson via video link. He keeps asking me to come over, but I can't leave the house. Yes, and here I am among neighbors as my own and smiling through tears. Neighbor went to his apartment. Michael stood smoking under the fence net and did not understand why he remembered him. But fate would once again bring the neighbors together in this case, albeit in a very unusual way. And now Michael stood smoking, looking, and could not make a step and continue his way. Maybe throw it to hell under his nose, said the guy. And then he almost jumped. On his shoulder lay the hand of William, the lead doctor, clinic, and supervisor of Michael's practice, who had seen the guy get off at the bus stop, how he had smoked, stopping under an old lime tree. And as he watched a group of paramedics walking in the courtyard of patients of doctors, laughing them among themselves, probably at some oily joke. Who are you gonna leave? Certainly not the practice at our fun and games place, but I think you're overdoing it on the fun and games. No, it's definitely that kind of black doctor humor. It is so, sort of so humor. The doctor smiled and took his ward under his arm and led him towards the psychiatric hospital, slowly but surely moving him towards the horrors that were going on inside its walls. The doctor had already made the decision to either involve Michael in his games or simply deprive him of his sanity if he did not agree to participate. Why him? It's simple. Michael is a new man in their collective one not so long ago, by chance, and he's strong for his age, plus handsome. Here is such a boy handsome, which is exactly suitable for filming spicy movies. Already in the clinic, the head doctor Noah and William took him through all the buildings, floors, and wards. Yes, the views are not the best, and emotions are not the brightest. Why should he be surprised, though? He knew where he was going. Michael was tormented by his grandmother's reasoning, but he knew if he asked that question directly, he'd be laughed at. But at the most, he'd get suspended. And the guy would never find out. Noah asked Michael over tea at the resident. There are all sorts of rumors about this clinic, in particular, mystical rumors. What do you have to say about that? Oh, Michael, you're a medical student, but you talk like a philology student who wants folklore. Or are you afraid of the ghost of the old empress or mother? The mother superior who drowned a truck in our pond at night. There's even a pond here. The boy's amazement was unparalleled. How long has he lived here in this town? I knew of clinics in the neighborhood, but the fact that there's also a pond. Remember the old movie about the Three Musketeers? Well, we have a lively pond just like that. It was organized by the previous head doctor. His wife worked as a landscape designer. So they set it up. We have a lily pond here. It's beautiful. There were fish swimming in it, but I guess our climate didn't suit them. They died out over the winter. But our patients don't care whether they're fish or lilies. And Ethan, an orderly with huge fists and a face resembling a tango arena, laughed as Michael's laughter made him shudder, and the doctors simply did not pay attention to him. And why do they tolerate such people in the clinic? Although on the other hand, there are some violent people who can't be subdued without physical force. Yeah, but Ethan's rudeness sometimes got to Michael, as did the thought of having to work with someone like that. Ethan, you show Michael to your office, where he can change his clothes, leave his things in the lockers and all that. He's only here for a couple months, so to speak, a couple months internship. But it's still got to be determined. Ethan nodded his head and waved his huge fist at Michael. Michael didn't show his displeasure. Let it be. A couple of months could be tolerated. And then he was promised to be taken to the second city as a staff psychiatrist, so he didn't worry about it too much. Michael obediently went down to the basement with Ethan and went to the very back of the clinic. Here, the orderlies had set up a room for a locker room and a kind of sports corner where you can hit a punching bag and play chess and dominoes. Don't be shy. Michael, take any locker that's not open. We have a lot of open seats right now, so let's get settled in. Why do so few people want to work at the clinic? Michael started asking questions from afar. I mean, who wants to hang out with a psycho? A lot of people think of it as a contagion. Being a psycho too. I just don't know any other job. Although at one time, just like you, I studied medicine. What did you study for? An orderly, that's what I studied. And my uncle put me to work here. My uncle. He's Noah. You've seen him. He's our chief of medicine. Good acquaintances, the boy thought, but he didn't say anything. Michael changed his clothes and began to get ready for his shift. The shift went relatively smoothly, and the next morning, the guy threw his backpack on his shoulders and left the clinic building. The sun was shining brightly, and there was nothing to portend any trouble, and all the things he had changed his mind about yesterday. Michael, it seemed like a fairy tale or fantasy. But really, what kind of fairy tales are fairy tales? We live in our developed world with computers, cameras on every corner. Even if there was something going on here, it would have been made public a long time ago. Michael, good morning. William called out to the guy and extended his hand to greet him and got straight to the point. How was your shift? Smoke. I don't smoke. Thank you. Yesterday it was just a dalliance, but the shift. Thank you. Everything went smoothly. William, can I make a personal request if I'm not interrupting something more important? Sure. Yes, of course. Anything I can do. Could you show me that pond you told me about yesterday? Wow. I guess you got caught up in the story last night. Come on. It's in the backyard. I'll show you around. I gotta be honest, you can't see it from the street. It took me a while to find it myself. It's so hidden, it's creepy. Is this place really inhabited? The center of Izhevsk. The doctor looked at him with a slight chuckle and said nothing, but waved his hand and led him deep into the park area of the hospital. Yeah, it's a bit of a wilderness, and that the most strange noise of cars from the street was not heard, although the clinic itself was located at the crossroads of quite busy central city roads. How quiet is it? And strangely enough, you can't hear much traffic from the road. Yes, you're right, Michael. You've noticed it's quiet. And here's the twig itself, and the head doctor spread the branches with his hands and let the boy go ahead. It's beautiful. Before, Michael opened a pond, laid out of stones behind burned black lilies, around which willows grew. And what was the most amazing thing? There were several statues in antique style of girls, hunting or carrying jugs on their shoulders. He had not seen such statues for a long time. Oh, it's beautiful. And notice the angle and the shot. You could even make a movie. What kind of horror movie have you seen in our cellars? There's no such thing as a cellar. Why? There are some. Yes, imagine that. And they lead to the local Cathedral of the Transfiguration, which is across the street from us. Are these cellars or cellars? I don't know. They lead to the monastery, and they say the monks at our clinic have the right people. And all because it wouldn't occur to anyone to look for a healthy person in a mental institution. Then there's been some kind of collapse in some places. Now these passages are impassable. That's for sure. No one's gonna come in here willingly. And then he noticed on the opposite bank the figure of a girl in a racy outfit. Kathy, he remembered her, because she had been brought here on the day when he had come to see the head doctor and applied for an internship at this clinic. The girl herself was not in the state she was in at the time. She was screaming at the doctors that the psychiatrist wanted to kill her. She's hearing voices and everything. That Kathy suffers from inner voices and a hypertrophied sex drive. Well, that's what her previous doctor said. Who knows? So far, the girl hasn't said a word. Why is she dressed like that? Short dress, fishnet stockings, ribbon in her hair. You know, Michael, it's one of my methods of letting the patient choose what they want. And by the way, where'd you get that outfit? That's a good question. Like many theatrical costumes, it was left to us by a theater. Exactly the theater. The director was jailed for some dark deeds, he and his wife. And the actors just ran away. And since the theater was near us, it's not a waste. And they were all dressed like royalty. Yes, imagining you as Henry Valois or Peter the Great. Michael, you're joking. But by the way, we had a wonderful carnival night here on New Year's Eve. And there was even a story about us in the paper. I hope it wasn't in a good context that a disguised Napoleon was walking around town claiming to be the real chief medical officer. No, we're all understanding people with a sense of humor. So we just hung around the Christmas tree. That one over there, by the way, by the entrance. And you know, people even took pictures with us on New Year's Eve. Yeah, that was fun. Thank you for the tour. I'm gonna go home and get some sleep. Thursday again for 24 hours. Michael, don't try too hard. You can't do all the work. You're a young guy. I nodded my head. But I thought to myself, no, I'm going to get you out of this. I think you're hiding something. Dear head doctor, but you don't need to know that. I had dinner tonight and sat down at the computer. Michael quickly made the first entries in his diary and then began to look for information about the local clinic. And indeed, there was a lot of information about it. Strangely enough, there was a lot of information about it, and with a very negative connotation. Murders, suicides, and strange deaths of both patients and doctors. Yes, there was a lot to work on and a lot to find out. But it was Kathy that bothered him the most. And he thought to himself, why not keep a sneaky eye on her room? The girl herself. Not without reason the head doctor was looking at her with such olive eyes. Grandma, the boy called out to his grandmother. Why did you shop like that? You won't let me watch my favorite TV show. What did you want? Grandma, I saw a girl at the clinic today. She was a victim of an incompetent hypnotist and suffered as a result. But that's not the point. She was wearing the outfit you mentioned, short dress, stockings, and a sash. Not surprising. One of your executives must have had their eye on her. I mean, she's new. She's a young girl too. I take it. So you're going to steal her? No, Grandma, I just want to keep an eye on her room. It's on the first floor, so it won't be a problem. To do anything, you have to have proof. That's what I'm required to do. Really, Michael, I'm old. I'm not going to play Sherlock Holmes with you. I'm more of a Mrs. Hudson. Grandma, that's not what I mean. Just cover for me in front of Mom. I'm gonna go over to the clinic tonight, stake out the windows, so to speak. I found a military A in Grandpa's closet. Okay, if anything, I'll tell Mom you're home already asleep. She's on call today anyway, so she won't be home. But you're my grandson, please. Don't get into any trouble. Okay. Michael nodded his head and poked the old lady on the cheek. He went back to his computer. What's going on at the clinic? How was your shift? The old woman was still interested in how true or not the rumors were. The rumors about the asylum. Yeah, Grandma. It's okay. I told you it was nothing like that. No, it's not. Our head doctor showed me the old pond on the grounds today, the one with the black lilies. Grandma didn't tell me about it. I went there and saw it because the wife of the former head doctor was my friend, and the pond itself is her creation. But the doctor didn't tell you that in the same pond they found the wife of the former one drowned. The guy shook his head, looked at his grandmother in surprise, but there's knee-deep water, and that's it. And this is the strangest thing. Her body was lying with her head in the water. She was submerged in the water, but her arms and legs were lying flat along her torso. They took a sturdy, adequate soldier and put her face down. That's all. And then they found water from the pond in his lungs. No signs of violence on the body. If that's what you're asking, it's odd that she came in, lay down, and swallowed the water to death. Drowned of her own volition. The guy was being sarcastic, but looking at the expression on his grandmother's face, he immediately faltered. Betty did not tolerate unnecessary words and jokes, and therefore immediately warned her grandson. Yes, Michael, death is strange. But if she did it herself, then she had a reason. And maybe even her own husband is the same as your current boss's overbearing. There's nothing to cure them. Maybe, under the old doctor, he and his brothers also had fun with innocent girls, and his wife found out and drowned them both. So, what of it? Or maybe who drowned them? But really, she won't become a ghost of a ghost, will she? Maybe she wouldn't. But believe me, there's something scary going on out there. And I'll tell you honestly, this new girl isn't worth the danger she's bringing upon herself. Trust me. The brotherhood of doctors, it's like that. Everyone protects each other. And even if they do something to her, that you can get to the bottom of it. But understand, a doctor will not testify against a doctor. So get on your nerves and leave her in there. At least I'll get her out and save her that way. All right. Michael, don't yell. I hear you. I accept your position. But I'm trying to warn you. You're putting yourself in a lot of danger. I understand all that. That's why I'm telling you where I'm going and what I intend to do. Betty nodded and stood up, heading for the door. She was worried about her grandson, but she realized she couldn't keep the young and hot guy away. So the woman simply stood on the doorstep and turned and said to Michael, "What if you take Uncle Benjamin, our neighbor from the second floor, to help you? He's old, but he's lean. And with his criminal record, he'd be a big help. I'll think about it. But it's not a bad idea. Although I'll tell you right away, I'll have to see for myself, do some recon, and then I'll tell them what's going on. Even if I go to him now, what can I say? Uncle Benjamin is there in the clinic raping women and many other things. And he'll tell me. Prove it. Just words. And I don't really believe it all myself. Just because a place is weird and old doesn't mean you can't ring all the bells. Yeah, there's too many girls. There's too many crazy people. And there's too many masquerades. But it's all right." And the grandmother left the room, closing the door a little behind her. Michael leaned back in his chair and thought for a moment. Uncle Benjamin is a criminal, but the grandmother is right. His experience and his nose for crime might help him. And an extra set of hands and eyes can always help. But first you have to go and see for yourself, and then you can go to your neighbor. All right, let's get ready. Michael threw a flashlight and a bottle of water into his backpack. Binoculars with good German optics can take a camera. What for? Basically, there's a cell phone. You can take video and photos with it. Okay, that's fine for the first time. Anyway, I'm not going to go in there. And throwing it on his shoulders, Michael went out into the corridor and began to study. The sounds Betty came out of his room and looked at his offspring carefully. "You're coming." "Yes, Grandma. Don't worry. I've got the phone, but don't call. I'll call you if I need to. In the meantime, lock it up. I think I'll be on the train in a couple of hours. 20 minutes to get there. An hour and a half and back, 20 minutes. So look, it'll be 3 hours. All right, Granson, but please be careful. If anything happens to me, your mother will rip my head off." Michael smiled at his favorite person and kissed her. He went outside. It was getting dark. What's so surprising? After work he washed up, then ate and slept, and now full of strength can and observe. The guy smiled, thought to himself that he should have gone not to the doctor, but probably to the investigators. Here is a confirmation of his words. A patrol car passed by and lit up the road with flashing beacons, but it alarmed the guy. No, not the car itself, not the flashing lights. It was the fact that the policeman stopped it around the corner and got out quietly, covering the door. They slammed it shut, as usual, quietly slipped through the hole in the fence of the psychiatric clinic, and went just as quietly, whispering among themselves. Wow, the cops are also in business, and the young medic's bewilderment had no limit. Did these columns, as his grandmother would say, come here too? Wow. Now, it's not just medical malpractice anymore. It's a group of gangs. And that's what he's encountered in practice. Come on. Maybe he just made a mistake, and the police came here on a signal, so to speak, to check what's going on here. But still, these two were acting weird, uncharacteristic. Michael slowly went in the direction of the secret eye. In the fence, jumped in the chassis, hiding behind the dense vegetation, and abundantly growing along this fence. That was a plus right now, and it wasn't exactly a starry night. So the guy slowly crept toward the ominous, overhanging park clinic. This 3-story old pre-revolutionary building was an eyesore in the city. It was going to be demolished long ago, moving the facility to the outskirts. But apparently, it wasn't worth it for the high-ranking officials to go there in search of hidden pleasures. "Come on, come in here," quietly said one policeman, and let the other one inside. The basement. Wow, they got the basement entrance open. I wonder who's on shift today. An old orderly with a long history of alcohol abuse, or Liam. Another one of the orderlies with a huge fist. When Michael himself asked about the door to the basement and the padlock, the head doctor secretly smiled and said, "This is the entrance to our basement paradise. And is it like growing marijuana there?" Michael decided to make a joke, but I guess the joke didn't work. The doctor looked at him sideways and said it wasn't pot. It was something else, but it's too early for him to know. Everything will show and tell later. And now they just let outsiders into this forbidden paradise. Maybe they are part-time security guards. Michael chuckled under his nose and began to approach the clinic building even more quietly. The windows of the wards on the first floor glowed with a dim light. It was the way the duty lights burned, and the light itself was enough to see what was going on in the wards. The guy intuitively approached the window of the room of the new patient, Kathy, and from surprise, almost dumbfounded on the spot. Guy saw her sitting on the bed, dressed in a short schoolgirl dress and with bows in her hair. Yeah, the guy almost whistled in surprise. And apparently, the girl heard his exclamation and looked out the window. Michael intercepted her gaze for a second. He was devastated. Apparently, she'd been pre-sedated with sedatives. But at the same time, there was a silent plea for help. But then, Liam and the doctor in charge entered the room, and the boy sat down instantly so as not to be seen. Michael sat under the window and listened intently to what was going on in the room itself. He heard the footsteps of 2 men and the creaking of a bed. Then the words of the head doctor. "Hello, Kathy. You're already dressed as well as you can be. Now let's go down to the basement with me and Liam. You'll find a lot of interesting things there." The basement where the 2 policemen went. Apparently, they had some sort of organized pleasure nook down there. And that's where they took her, drugged her with psychotropics. But what to do? The guy quietly sank to the ground and put his hands around his head. What to do? What to do? And then the front door creaked and Michael squeezed into the ground. 3 men came out of them and headed towards the basement. Goodnight was dark, and the yard of the clinic was not illuminated. Therefore, he simply was not noticed. But only the girl turned back, looked in his direction, and cried. Tears rolled silently down her face. Michael heard Noah begin to quietly soothe the girl and told the orderly, "Lie him at the school, to her in the basement for another dose of sedative. We didn't want her to wake up at the right moment." And the chief of police wasn't happy with his new doll. "Yeah, sure, Noah. Let's get her in and give her a quick shot." And the trio began to make their way down to the basement. Michael had one single desire: to break into the basement and snatch Kathy out of the hands of doctors and cops. But he realized how impossible that would be. No, he was not intimidated by the company, the doctors and the cops, to do their dark deeds. But he realized they'd just smash him there. And that would be it. And no one will know where his grave is. Call the militia. What will he say there? The head doctor and a policeman raping a mentally ill patient won't believe him. And even if they do, what's next? But the brigade will arrive on a call. And what? Nothing. If the police come to such costume parties, it means that the management is aware of it, and at least the case will be closed. At the most, they can either kill him in the same basement and bury him here or put him in jail for something. I mean, even if it's for abusing Kathy. So think, Michael, think. Maybe you're imagining things. Yeah. And the cops are here for nothing. But at that very moment, the basement door opened and a policeman came running out. "Vasia," he shouted, "I've been away for a couple of hours. There's an emergency at the police station, but I'll be back later. Leave me that girl for later." And the policeman rushed to the car. The guy heard the engine roar and the tires skid across the sand. But the strangest thing was that from the cellar no one answered him, and no one had ever closed the door. It wasn't locked. It's called "Come In." Whoever wants in and whoever wants out. Whoever wants in and whoever wants out. Michael rushed to the cellars and started to go down the stairs, listening to every sound. But he heard nothing, neither footsteps nor any other sounds. There were supposed to be at least 4 people down there. And they certainly weren't singing lullabies. But maybe it was for the best. The boy opened the cellar door and slipped inside. The corridor was sparsely lit, and there was a pantry open right next to the entrance. The guy peeked into it just in case, to make sure there was no one there. And in case of emergency, he could hide in this room. Yes, there are shelves and bears in principle a place for a hiding place. But at that very moment, at the end of the corridor, footsteps were heard. It was the guest of the night police and the head doctor. The boy immediately recognized the figure of his superior. They were talking quietly about something, and as they approached, the boy could hear what they were talking about. What he heard made him not just overcome, but terrified to the point of truly experiencing fear, not only for the poor girl, but for his own life. "Noah, thank you for the welcome. But you see, the warden's gone. We've had an emergency at the council since this morning. The commission's here, so we're saving Kathy for dessert, so to speak. Yes, you understand correctly. Everything is normal. No excesses or incidents. No one is interested in anything. Yes, in principle, everything's fine. Except we got a new orderly coming in for an internship. We didn't apply for the internship, but he did. So, they're interested in the job, and the clinic in particular. Why are our patients dressed so oddly? Of course, like you said, it's all been blamed on the tour and the theater we had a year ago. And then they disbanded it. But I don't think he believed it. So what do you suggest? Maybe we should press him a little so he doesn't stick his nose where it doesn't belong. No, I think I can handle it. And you know, it's normal to be questioned about our clinic. Michael listened and realized it was about him. His breath cleared, and he even found it hard to breathe. And as luck would have it, the couple stopped near the open door to the storeroom, where the new employee was hiding behind the racks with his colleagues. The policeman looked into the storeroom, but seeing nothing, quietly said to the head doctor, "Okay, Noah, let's postpone our sit-downs for the time being. Lie down while holding this girl. The chief liked her, and the school drill outfit matches. We'll be there in a couple days. In the meantime, we'll be in touch. Call me if you need anything." The head doctor didn't say anything. He escorted the guest outside and returned a couple minutes later. Michael, all these minutes, which seemed like hours to him, sat and did not breathe, although his heart was pounding frantically and was ready to jump out of his chest. And this breathing and heartbeat, it seemed to the lad to be striking a bell in the silence. But there was nothing he could do about it. The boy heard the head doctor pass by his cell and head deep into the corridor, muttering something to himself. After a few minutes, he looked out of the door and, seeing no one, slipped out into the street. He breathed in the cool air of the night and took a few deep breaths in and out and began to make his way toward the dead vine. At the fence, Michael walked slowly, not even looking around, being in slight shock at everything he saw. What could be going on in there? What did I see there? Nothing. Just heard the doctor and the cops talking about something. But I don't know what they were talking about. Maybe it's some kind of videotape as part of a police investigation. The guy was trying to drown out the thoughts that kept popping into his head, and he'd heard of costume parties like this a long time ago. But to have minds devoid of girls and women take part in it, there was no such thing. All right, who am I kidding? Trying to fool. There's definitely something going on in that basement that's scary and illegal, and it's got to stop. Poor girls. He didn't know what to do. He didn't know what to do. He'd have to go to Uncle Benjamin. That old bastard will surely tell him what to do, won't he? How? He'll help. The guy did not notice how he reached the house, how he went up to the floor and opened the doors with his keys, closing them quietly. Michael leaned against the wall and from powerlessness and experience simply slid to the floor. Grandma came out of the room at that moment and flicked the light switch. The bright light blinded the guy. It and realized, "Grandma, why are you awake?" He tried to look normal, but apparently the expression on his face told the old lady everything. "Why? You want me to tell you why? What happened? Tell me. You're white as chalk." "Grandma, I don't want to. I wish I was like this right now. Come on, go take a shower to wash off the negativity. Then we'll go to the table. I spared a cutlet, and I'll pour you one of my own." The guy did not argue, and simply went to the bathroom, pulled off all the clothes and scattered them on the way. When in the bathroom heard the sound of water, Betty collected the guy's things and threw them into the washing machine. "No dirt to lay around. I'll wash everything tomorrow." When Michael came out of the bathroom, there was a late dinner and a bottle of tincture on the table. The woman poured him a shot and handed it to him without saying anything. Nor did the grandson ask anything. He took it quietly and knocked it over. All at once. "Take the cutlets, mashed potatoes, salad. Let's eat." The guy sat down at the table without saying a word. He poured himself a second shot of olive and tipped it just as quietly and started on the homemade cutlets. He ate and thought, should he tell his grandmother of his suspicions? But Betty was not so foolish, as modern young people might think. I take it Kathy had gotten into the local psychiatric brothel and was simply being kept on psychotropic drugs. Michael chewed and nodded his head and simply couldn't drop a word. Not because he was eating, but because he was choked with emotion, and he didn't want to upset his grandmother. But his grandmother was not stupid and immediately realized everything as soon as his grandson entered the house. "You know, grandmother, there are not only doctors involved, there are also the police, and most likely, the very top. They came here today twirled around and left. It's like an emergency in the department. So they didn't stay the night. And this girl. And then Michael shook from the experience. Tears rolled down his cheeks, and he couldn't stop. How could they do that? It's not just they're renting prostitutes, who know what they're in for and where they're going. And all this with mentally ill women. How so? Michael, I get it. That's why I told you not to go there, but you wouldn't listen. And now you've got to figure out how to deal with it. You're not going to go to the police. You said it yourself. The whole chain of command is tied up. So what do we do? You can't go with a machine gun against everyone. You don't have to do it yourself. I told you. Go talk to our neighbor tomorrow. You know, the one below us, Benjamin. He's a thief. He's old school, I think. Plus, he's got a grudge against the police. So if he doesn't help, he'll certainly tell me what to do and who to turn to. The guy nodded his head and poured himself another olive. He drank and couldn't taste it. Slowly he digested all that he had seen and heard, thinking how he should proceed. But Babushkina's spit turned out to be quite strong, and already in half an hour the guy was pecking his nose. Go to bed, my sorrow. Tomorrow mother will come, and you with red eyes sleep. And then I'll cook for you for the evening. Pour the stuffed cabbage. With all this good stuff you'll go and ask your neighbor for advice. Grandma, thank you. I'm going. Michael only laid his head on the pillow, as he was immediately dreaming. He slept and did not dream. Though emotions so and so raged inside him. But apparently the young body could handle giving his head a rest. Indeed, he slept until almost lunchtime. And when he got up at 12 o'clock, he found no one home in the kitchen. All he caught was a note from his mother. Say, lunch on the table from his grandmother, stuffed cabbage in her purse, cash in the fridge in the back. We had a snack in Russia too. Michael went down to the second floor and called Uncle Benjamin's apartment. He didn't open the door right away, but he wouldn't let the guys in. Michael, do you want something? Uncle Benjamin, my grandmother gave you Golutsov, and he pointed to the bottle. And then I'd like to talk to you about a sensitive matter. The old one stomped on the doorstep. He liked Betty's stuffed cabbage, and it wasn't nice to say no to a neighbor. It wasn't proper. But he had guests he didn't want Michael to meet. The guy heard he had a stranger as a guest, maybe the lady of his heart, and he's here with his own problems. Uncle Benjamin, if I'm interrupting, I'm sorry, but can I come back later? Yes. Michael, I'm sorry, guest, come back at 8 o'clock. And here's Betty. A special thank you. Her stuffed cabbage is a work of art. Benjamin nodded his head and closed the door gently. Yeah, the stuffed cabbage and cash came in handy. There would be something to feed and drink an old friend. He came unexpectedly, and frankly speaking, the skull's visit surprised Benjamin and made him a little wary. And what does the skull need from old Kogan? And a vagabond. Yeah, maybe our old friend stomping on the doorstep for starters. Hopefully, the doorstep isn't where friends have a business conversation. Oh no, sure, come on in. Except there's nothing to buy. But I did not come here to eat. The restaurant will not feed. If you want strong tea with your girlfriends, I won't refuse. You owe me tea and my girlfriends. When Benjamin went to put the kettle on, the doorbell rang. It was Michael, but not the landlord. Neither did his guests know about it. Both were wary. But since Benjamin had long since retired and felt no guilt, he boldly opened the door. After talking to his neighbor for a few minutes, he returned to the room with the fools and the cash. Oh, I see the delivery service is working perfectly, joked the skull. Yes, in the face of the upstairs neighbor. He came in to talk some business. So I brought this to butter the old man up. But I asked him to wait till tonight. In the meantime, try these homemade stuffed cabbage. By the way, and cherry is a delight. The men sat down at the table, poured a shot glass each and, having drunk, had a snack. And how not to drink? because it would make the conversation easier. Benjamin looked at the old thief in the law and quietly asked what brought you to me. You didn't just come 10 years after our last case. Yes, I did. And for good reason. I'll tell you right off the bat. I was put in charge of this town not that long ago, but I think you already know that. Now, I've heard rumors that young girls and women have been going missing in this town for the last few years. Well, you can blame it on anything, although all roads lead to your local mental institution. You know what I'm getting at? Yeah, I've heard bad things about her too, Benjamin said, and poured another round of shots. But how can I tell you, Skull? They're just rumors. You know, you can't do anything without proof. That's true. But in addition to the fact that young girls have been brought into this almshouse and treated for whatever reason, the cops have been frequenting it in recent months. They probably set up a brothel there together with the doctors and have fun there. And how not to party? It's a hell of a roof. Skull, are you sure? The old watcher nodded his head and threw a piece of fool into his mouth. He poured himself and his friend a shot for cream. What was there to say? Home-cooked food, still, that delicacy and luxury. And he, as an old thief who had spent most of his life in colonies and prisons, understood that. But that's not what we're talking about now. The daughter of a street Petersburg authority figure is missing. And so far, all roads lead here. You see, Alex's daughter is missing. Well, you remember him. He was on my team. Then he retired. He's got a family, but his daughter's missing. And all roads lead here to this mental institution. Yeah, and you said she could be in that new house. What about him? What did he do? He's been raising his own, and he's almost filed a police report. But nothing. Benjamin sat and thought about it. He really heard from his friends that in the last couple of years young beauties began to disappear and that it was the doctors or the cops who were involved. But that was talk, and no more evidence. But if the daughter of an authority figure has disappeared and the tracks led here, that's serious. Skull, couldn't it be a banal showdown? It's been speculated. But no, that's not it. Is that why I need your help? How long have you lived near this fine establishment in this town? Take a good look, Skull. By the way, Michael, but the guy who came in the other day with these fools, he works there as an orderly. How does he work? I think he's been there a while. But I asked him. That's what we decided. But in the evening, Benjamin didn't even have to ask the guy. 8 o'clock sharp. He was already sitting in his kitchen and drinking strong and sweet tea, which the owner had brewed, and put in front of the guy. Come on, complain. Who has offended? What happened? Yes, you see, I only have a son-in-law here. You know, I finished the basic course in my medical school, and now I'm practicing. But guess what? I know our psychiatric clinic. I've complained before. And I warned you, it's gonna be tough out there. But what happened? And by the way, I have a couple questions for you about your psych ward. Later, though. Now, come on, tell me. So my grandmother and some other people said there was something going on there, but I didn't believe it. But my grandmother pointed out one thing to me. They dress. The young and beautiful in short dresses and stockings and braid their hair. And do you know why? Michael looked at his neighbor, and in his throat stood. He couldn't say it out loud, but he knew he needed help, at least in advice, at least in deed. The old thief sat and looked at the guy, realizing that he not only needed to speak out and ask for advice, but the conversation itself was going in the right direction for him. You see, Uncle Benjamin, they raped them there. Maybe they're even videotaping the whole thing. The guy just gasped at his own words and the realization that Kathy was there and what could be done to her. He took a breath and continued. That's why I came. I've heard about this clinic for a long time, but last night I decided to go and look around. But in short, Uncle Benjamin, I saw 2 cops going down to the basement, as well as our head doctor as an orderly. And they were taking a new girl down there. But apparently the cops had some kind of emergency, and they left quickly. But most importantly, I heard one of them telling our head doctor to leave the girl for later. The guy briefed me on the whole thing and looked at the reaction of the old tramp. On his face was read not only surprise, but also interest, especially a last news. Kathy was the name of the daughter of a street Petersburg authority who was considered missing or even killed, almost by order of the opposing gangs. And what does this girl look like? Tell me. I'm sorry, I'm asking you this for a reason. A friend of mine had a missing daughter. Her name was Kathy, and it all leads back to our town. Maybe it's her. The guy thought about it for a minute and started describing her in detail. But the most important feature the guy remembered was a scar on her left ankle. Then he listened and couldn't believe his ears. He knew the street Petersburg authority Alex and his daughter, and the very scar the girl had gotten, falling from a tree. His heart stabbed. Wow, that's how you find an authority figure's missing daughter. That's lucky. But maybe it's not her at all. Michael, why don't you show her to me? But we'll go tonight, when the patients are out on the street. Show it to me gently. But in terms of what's being done to them, we'll have to get into that basement, look in the nooks and crannies. Can you get the key? Michael shook his head negatively, but Benjamin just waved his hand. What can I expect from you? He went into the room and rummaged through the closet. A set of thieves' lockpicks was there. Basically, we can look inside this basement at night. Okay, Michael, when are you going to work? Tomorrow. Well, we'll go together early in the morning. You'll show me from afar the basement, and then if you're psychotic, sorry, patients are walking around. Point your finger at Kathy. They don't go out this early. They only let them out at lunchtime and in the evening. Okay, well, just show me the basement, and then at lunchtime, I'll come to that walk, and you can show me Kathy. But why? Uncle Benjamin, you think she's your friend's daughter. I knew for a fact she was no fool. From your description, it looks like it, but I'll have to see for myself. So Michael, it would help if you showed her to me. As for proof, I can pick any lock. Just dibs. It's our secret. I'll look, and then, if there's anything interesting, we'll figure out how to proceed. Michael was fine with that, and he calmed down a bit. But then I asked him the same question. What if there is nothing there that can be caught on? Michael, you're like a little child. I know exactly what to look at and what to look for. And then we'll set up a camera and film their antics. The old bastard chuckled, but when he looked at the boy's face, he stopped short. Yeah, I guess he wasn't laughing. Although, if you think about it, it's the height of cynicism to do such a thing as people in white coats and the police cover for them. Yeah, I got a special thing for the police. Plus, if this Kathy brothers, thank me very much. Michael, I'm sorry. I guess years in places not so remote haven't made a saint out of me. But I do feel sorry for your charges, especially since some of them were just stabbed with antidepressants and sedatives, and now they're doing this. But that's okay. I'll take a look. We'll set up cameras if we have to. Then I'll report everything to the gang, and they will disperse your gang in no time. Michael listened and understood that the neighbor could do all this. But how to get the whole gang out? Uncle Benjamin. But understand the proof for your friends is good, but the case must be taken to court. Michael, do you take me for a fool? Imagine for a minute, if we're looking for my friend's daughter, he'll make such a scandal. He'll involve everyone he can. Lawyers and press, law enforcement, you name it. But most importantly, your head doctor and his cronies won't get away. That's what I need. Michael closed his eyes and leaned back in his chair. For some reason, he believed this old jailer, although he realized that Benjamin was not without sin. All right, Benjamin, let me show you the loophole in the fence at the entrance tomorrow, and then the cellar itself. and you can come to this fine by 12 o'clock. That's when our patients take their lunchtime walks. I'll try to show you Kathy." Benjamin nodded and sipped from a cup of strong tea. He was satisfied with today. Helping Skull and freeing Kathy would be a big plus for him, and he'd been wanting to mess with the cops for a long time, if they were really nasty in that asylum. Michael got up and went home. It was almost 22 o'clock on the clock. It was necessary to wash and sleep. Tomorrow was a crucial and decisive day. In the morning, Benjamin, already 6:45, stood near the entrance and smoked. He put on a dark, unremarkable suit cap and dark glasses. He pulled up a cigarette and thought about the situation with Michael, Kathy, and this almshouse in general. "Uncle Benjamin, hello." Michael greeted his neighbor and extended his hand to him. The man flashed him a cigarette and shook his hand. Quietly, Michael said, "Just call me Benjamin without uncle. I feel like an old man. I'm not young, but I'm not an old man at heart." "All right. You ready to go?" He nodded, and the men walked slowly in the direction of the psychiatric clinic, talking among themselves. Like old friends, Michael walked and looked around so as not to catch the eye of the head doctor or one of the orderlies. There was no need to draw attention to himself. Approaching the fence of the psychiatric clinic, Michael looked around carefully and pointed with his hand to the entrance to the basement. "This is the basement, and there's an opening further along the fence into the grounds. Just right for you. Just right. Now let's move on." They went further, passing the very gap in the fence, which was so advantageously disguised by the leaves of wild ivy and vines. Michael looked around again and pointed to the platform. "In front of the main entrance. This is our so-called women's quarters, and it's where our patients walk from 12 until lunchtime. If anything, I can say from my observation, Kathy often likes to stand under that London tree, which is closer to the road. I've noticed her standing under the tree a couple of times, looking out at the roadway." Kathy nodded his head and lit a cigarette. He went on his way, throwing a few words to the guy. "Good, then I'll see you tonight, or rather, tomorrow. Drop by my place in the evening to look at the collections." Michael looked at his neighbor and said nothing. He's weird. But on the other hand, he needs help now. And if the neighbor helps, it will be great. After all, even one life-saving achievement of medicine shift this day went quietly. No incidents, excesses, or patient antics. No nighttime police visits that might have suggested bad thoughts. Except that Kathy was restless this day. Michael watched her from the residence window, and at one point, noticed the girl becoming anxious. She began to wave her head intensely, and her ribbons in her hair fluttered in the wind. Then she turned abruptly and ran away from the fence. Directing his life toward Black Pond, the boy looked carefully at the roadway. Near the curb stood a dark blue, unremarkable car, old, but on the move, strange. "Who is it?" Michael said it out loud. And then another orderly, Liam, turned around and looked out the window. "What kind of car is that? We've got to get to the bottom of this." And he ran out of the office, and in a few seconds his broad back the guy saw near the fence. The orderly waved his hands, shouted something in the direction of the driver, but apparently it had no effect. A few minutes later, though, when the chief physician started to approach the car suddenly sped off. "That's an interesting situation. What's all the fuss about? It's just a car. You can't even see through the tinted windows. Who's in there?" After a couple of minutes, Liam entered the office red as a boiled crawfish and started pacing the room back and forth. Michael at first said nothing, and then asked with the most indifferent tone possible, "And who was it in the car?" "Yes, you see, Michael, one psycho or psychos drive here under the fence and look at our patients. File a police report." The guy deliberately put such a provocative question, looking at the orderly and watching his reaction, but his face reflected nothing but anger and irritability. What's the use of these cops? They only throw up their hands. They say it's none of our business. No corpus delicti and all that. And we have to run around chasing these assholes away. Yeah, there's plenty of crazy people out there. By the way, have you noticed how new this is? Kathy's patient reacted to that car. No, I didn't see her shaking, and she stood there shaking her head, and then she ran toward Black Pond. Oh, shit. Why didn't you say something? And the orderly rushed out into the street. I wonder why he reacted like that. Michael became curious, and he went to the window. The orderly was standing next to the head doctor, telling him something. Then he pointed toward the pond, and they both went there at a brisk pace. This is interesting, thought the trainee, and quickly ran to the first floor. He went to the artificial pond, which enjoyed a bad reputation already on the shore of the notorious Black Pond. The guy caught a picture on the shore, sat Kathy, and swayed, and near her stood an orderly and the chief physician, and nervously smoked. Guy did not understand what was going on, so he approached the trio and nodding at the girl, asked Noah, what happened? Yeah, you know, Michael. The first day Kathy almost went swimming in the lake, and when Liam said, she ran here, I thought she had a craving for water again. So she'd have wet her feet in waist-deep water. How can I put it, Michael? Our patients are such that they can drown themselves in a spoonful of water, and her reaction to the car, Liam told me about, also surprised me. She never showed any emotion before. Maybe the hypnosis has stopped working, and she is coming to her senses and grieving. You've probably been skipping classes on the subject of hypnosis, and it's the kind of thing that doesn't weaken over time. It's not sleeping pills or tranquilizers, is it? I guess, Noah, I guess. Both Michael and the doctor in charge stood by the lake for a few minutes, watching as the orderly took Kathy to the women's ward. I wonder what's going to happen to her and why she reacted the way she did to the car parked near the fence. Is there something to that? I'll have to tell my neighbor about it. Maybe he knows something, but the neighbor was the one in that car. Benjamin kicked his old broad out of the garage and thought it would be more convenient to watch the loony bin on wheels. It was at 1:30 that he drove the car up to the place where the loonies were strolling, and oh joy, near this fence stood Kathy. It was the daughter of the St. Petersburg authority figure. There was no doubt about it. Yes, he had seen her about 15 years ago. She had grown up and become a beautiful girl, but her eyes were still the same, just like when he'd seen her at her birthday party when she was 7. I wonder if the scar is still there. I should ask Michael to look at the scar on her leg. That's the only way to tell. I parked Benjamin's car with the window down and looked at the girl carefully. They must have drugged the poor girl with some pills. She's as good as dead. Eyes blank, all dressed up in some stupid costume. Yeah, I guess the guy's right about it all looking like something. The man rolled down the passenger side window more and called out to the girl, Kathy, listen to me. Don't be afraid. I'm Uncle Benjamin. Do you remember me? The girl stood there for a minute, paying no attention to the car and the driver. Then she turned her head and looked at him. At that moment, Benjamin waved his hand and smiled. But a meaningful thought suddenly flashed on the girl's face, and she began to shake her head, and then screamed and rushed running towards the park. Shit. Benjamin didn't expect such a reaction, and so quickly, closing the window, rushed out of the place in the direction of the city. I don't want to be seen here, otherwise they'll dump the office. Benjamin drove around the city for half an hour, and coming back, he could not resist and drove slowly along the fence of the psychiatric clinic. But there was no one in the yard. It must be lunchtime, the man said to himself, and decided to have a snack. He turned the steering wheel and headed for the nearest cafe to drink strong flavored coffee and eat a sweet mug. He had long favored this cafe with its own pastry shop. It served the strongest coffee and delicious pastries, just like when he was a kid. Yes, The man thought, when my grandson comes to visit me, I'll definitely bring him here with his father to drink coffee and eat more delicious food. But emotions came over Benjamin at the mention of his grandson, and a traitorous terror returned to his eye. "You're not well." The waitress came up to the man and handed him a menu. No, the girl just remembered his grandson, who lives abroad with his father, and thought that it would be nice to bring him here. "It's just a bit of a rush, so to speak. I understand. Coffee and a mug for you as always. Although, I'd advise you that our pastry chef has never tasted better. Let's have your labor. We should try it. Because girlfriends. The man drank coffee and smiled at the rays of sunshine that penetrated the cafe, fell on his table and hands. It was so good to just sit there and think about nothing and enjoy every minute. But he had to go home and think about how to plan his evening, or rather, his night out at the clinic. Benjamin paid for his coffee and, leaving the waitress a generous tip, drove home. Already at home he slept, touched up, under the shower, and after making himself a strong tea, sat down in the kitchen. Coffee is good, but strong and sweet tea helped him to think. Probably habits from places not so distant were making themselves known, but he had long ago stopped paying attention to the fact that he was sitting down and what people would think of it. And now he was helping a friend whose daughter had disappeared under very strange circumstances. A traitorous terror came to Benjamin's eye again. He remembered his daughter, beautiful and clever, who had gone to the Emirates and found her happiness there. How she was happy about her new job. And her husband, who, to his credit, loved her very much. Pregnancy and rejoiced. But, so Benjamin Nikita do not need to wipe the snot and pull Kathy. And the man began to pack a backpack, a flashlight, and an old lockpick set for a night out. Machine oil, so the lock wouldn't stick, if anything. Now, having lost one daughter, he wanted to help his friend Kathy's daughter get out of the asylum. The man had long thought about why she had been kidnapped a year ago from her father's home, and many people had written it all off as a thievery. But that's not the case here. Alex is a competent and clever man. He's handled the most heated disputes, so sworn enemies parted as friends and best partners. And here, who would take revenge? No, the man shook his head. It's something else, he thought to himself, not what others think. Why did he think that? He didn't know. But if the girl he'd seen today was Kathy and was his friend's daughter, Benjamin realized what the reason might be. The girl had an unearthly beauty, her figure, long blonde hair, blue eyes, and she had the same mind as her father. And if he was right, then she was probably kidnapped by visiting tourists who were in the business of kidnapping and shooting racy movies. Maybe that's what happened. But the man was simply afraid to think what Kathy might have done. After all, even among the right criminal authorities, violence is a forbidden topic. A woman must be loved. She must be persuaded. You have to placate her with gifts and kisses, but you can't rape her. All the more to shoot nasty things against her will. It's one thing for a woman to do it for money. It's another to rape her. Well, it's gonna be all right now. Be patient, Kathy. Throwing his backpack over his shoulders, Benjamin went out into the street and headed towards the psychiatric clinic. It was already dark, and there were no stars in the sky. What pleased the old thief? He quietly approached the fence and skulked away, but with a ducking motion. He stopped imperiously under a tree and looked around. There was no one. There was silence. It was ringing dark. Only, in the windows of the first-floor patients' rooms, there was a dim light burning. That's good. That means I won't need a flashlight. This light will suffice. And the man rushed to the cellar, quickly oiled the lock, and opened it professionally. Benjamin did not hang it in place, leaving the door covered, but not tightly, so that in case of need he could quickly run out. The hinges should be oiled as well. It wouldn't be good if the door suddenly peeked open quickly, coping with the hinges. The man began to listen to the sounds in the basement and slowly walked forward. The hallway was quiet. On the left side were storerooms, some closed, others without doors. That's fine, the old thief thought. There will be a place to hide in case of trouble. Strange, where these subhumans had found a porn studio. But at the very end, Benjamin saw a massive door, so stuffed with felt. Yeah, there you are, and soundproofed at the very end so. No one could hear the girls screaming, the bastards. He went to the door and listened. But what kind of work had been done there? But what kind of barrier was there? There was no door that could not be opened by an old thief who had gone through a fine school. Indeed, the locks were also hidden under a layer of felt. Good point. No sound will get through the gaps. Well, that's clever, but I'll get you open. The man lifted the layer of felt carefully and listened. Quiet, which means no one. That's good, which means we can work. And Benjamin carefully began to pick the lock. Yes, it's a fancy lock, but for a craftsman like me, it shouldn't be too hard to pick. And after a couple minutes, the man opened the door to the secret studio. Wow, that's quite a spread. The furnishings, state-of-the-art, technology, and newfangled digital equipment, all put to great use. No wonder with the police running it all. And apparently, they're making a lot of money. Yeah, I guess crazy movies are popular with crazy people. But that man heard how heavy doors, covered with his lacquer, began to open, and without thinking, Benjamin jumped under the bed. That's quite a situation. At least the bed was wide, and it was covered with a long sheet all the way to the floor. Shit, thought the thief. What a fool not to listen to what was going on outside the door. So I got him. The main thing is not to suspect anything and not to search the place. But apparently the unexpected guests didn't suspect a thing. Oh, look, Noah's already opened the door. Didn't have to fiddle with the lock. Yeah, Stas. It's a nice studio. There's plenty of room for fun. And the man sat down on the bed and took pictures, and he laughed. Apparently, it was the cops Michael was talking about, who had been let in by the head doctor. So Benjamin quietly exhaled and listened further. Yes, boss. What are we going to do here? Are we going to film racy scenes? No, just participate. We got some local girls from the head doctor. So we'll try new things, boss will. It's not very exciting, but it's mental. I don't know what's on her mind. Would she bite or stab at the peak of pleasure? No. Yeah, well, it's a valid concern, Benjamin thought. But if you had a knife, you'd be so heavy. You'd be falling out of bed. You must be 150 pounds. And all that on a young girl. Ugh, that's disgusting. But what to do? So far, luck was not on his side. But then another man came into the room and said, "Sorry, Mr. Mikhailovich, I can't make it today. Apparently, it's either the moon or the stars. But our girls are on a rampage." Aha. Apparently, the head doctor tearfully apologizes for his wards. But apparently, the police, brass didn't like the news. And he's not happy. Noah, why is that? Or does the hospital no longer have the appropriate injections? We've injected a couple of times, and the girl sleeps well. Yeah, we've already injected them, but it's still wrong. I'm sorry. Come back in a couple days and I'll put them on hard shots. Then they'll be as smooth as silk. All right. The cop said grudgingly and got out of bed, walked towards the exit. But next time, there should be 2 or even 3 girls. The doctor answered nothing, but only closed the door behind his guests, locking it shut. After a few minutes, the thief crawled out from under the bed and began to look around. He decided not to rush out of the room, but to put his video camera here. He definitely needed proof of what was going on here. Kathy then. He can quietly get out of the room, but this office needs to be covered up, and he knows to whom he will send the received materials. To his daughter Alex. Unsure he'd tear anyone's throat out. quietly, looking around, only stopped her gaze on the partners who were closing the improvised window. So over there at the very top you can install a camera. Yeah, it was a good thing he had his introductions. And not too long ago, he'd been fitted with a mini camera that ran on batteries and turned on the recording at any movement. So, sweetie, put it up and film it here. And the other day I'll come and check what you've prepared for me and make sure the camera is in working order. Benjamin copied carefully his video, point, and check everything behind him, and quietly left the room. He locked the door and quietly walked out of the basement. There was no one near the entrance, but still God protects him, said the nun. The thief said quietly and began to walk along the walls to the cherished fence. Going out into the street, he took and walked along the road, pretending to stroll in the picturesque. Cat, taking in his hands a pre-prepared bottle of beer. And even if he was stopped by the police, they would not be able to attribute anything but an administrative offense to him. Although it's not like breaking into a mental institution, but I'll get over it. And with a quiet step, he went in the direction of his house. Got to the house. Benjamin quickly for about 10 minutes and already in his apartment, having thrown off his clothes and stood under the shower, he exhaled with relief. Yes, I have not seen such a case since the dashing 90s. But the good thing is now there will be evidence and grounds to visit you, gentlemen in white coats on legal grounds, and smash your balaganza with all the proletarian hatred. We've had a night's experience, and the smell of a psychiatric clinic. Old Kogan went to the kitchen and made himself some tea. He had to think calmly about what he had seen and how to present it to his street Petersburg friend. The fact that they were making strawberries there, the man realized. And in principle, the camera will definitely record all the abominations. It's a matter of technique and time. But what about the girl who looked a lot like Kathy? You'll have to leave that to Michael. He works there, albeit as an orderly, but it would be easier for him to examine her under any pretext. Now, we just have to wait for the morning and for what Michael and I will bring. Benjamin turned off the light and left the cup on the table and went to bed. After all, the coming day also promised a lot of things to do and new information. It was necessary to have a fresh head to think everything over and make the right decision. Already, closer to 10 o'clock to the old thief at the door rang. Probably Michael, and he was not mistaken. Uncle Benjamin, I came straight from work to see you. May I come in? I've been waiting for you. I just got up and made breakfast. Give me my hands and sit down at the table. I don't feel like eating right now. Uncle Benjamin, do you have a lump in your throat? Our lunatics almost went crazy today. I don't know what happened, but they all went crazy. Some howled, others sang songs, and the women's ward all threw off their clothes. It was a restless night, I know. Michael looked at his neighbor perplexed, but did not ask anything. He sat down at the table and looked at the plate of scrambled eggs Benjamin had placed in front of him. I stopped by your lovely basement today and got into the spicy studio. And by the way, while I was there were visitors, most likely. Your Noah, the head doctor, and the police. But don't worry, nothing happened. First came the cops, then came your doctor and said that the patients are raging. So everything was quickly turned off. But it's not worth the wait. He promised them strawberries in a couple days. So, but no. But I left the video camera there for now. I'll pick it up in a couple days. We'll see what's on it. And then we'll figure out where to go and who to show it to. By the way, did you check to see if this new Kathy patient of yours has a cross-shaped scar? Yeah, the night before everyone else. I was working on her, and I got a good look at it. It's a small one just below the kneecap. Benjamin nodded and smiled. So it really is Kathy. She had been found. There was no doubt now. That was good. I'd have to get proof of the luxury, the doctors, and the police. Then we could celebrate. Victory. It's her. said Benjamin, eating scrambled eggs. There's no doubt now, but we have to wait a while. Let the camera capture everything, and then trust me, I know who to show the material to, and it won't go away. Uncle Benjamin, I realize you're a lawman, but it's one thing to have a criminal altercation and another. This needs to go to court. That's right, sweet man. What did you think? Gangbangers in black cars are gonna come in and shoot everybody, and that's it? No, we're just gonna show them all up. And then there's the lawyers, the courts, and of course, the media. Don't worry about that. Just keep your ear to the ground at your job and try to make sure that nothing happens to Kathy during these days. By the way, who's giving her the sedation shots? Yeah, there's this Liam, orderly, big guy with huge fists. Why? Try to make sure you get the job. You make sure you don't give the girl the shots. She has to come off the drugs and be, so to speak, sober and clear-headed when it all comes to a head. But even if things don't work out, just keep an eye on her. Michael nodded his head and smiled, acknowledging the breakfast. He himself hadn't noticed how hungry he'd gotten in 24 hours and practically gobbled up everything he'd prepared in one fell swoop. Yes, he had a good appetite. The landlord looked at the young orderly and smiled. The man brewed tea and took out his favorite girlfriends. Let's drink tea. And listen to me carefully for now. Michael nodded his head, began to listen to the old thief. He told him that Kathy, supposedly the daughter of one of the street Petersburg authorities, it was time to close the studio, and his help would be very helpful. And she wasn't mentally ill, more like a kidnapping victim. Half an hour later, the guy was on his way home. Uncle Benjamin's gonna go, or my mother and grandmother will be worried. And you call me if you need anything. And where will you find out? Okay, while we wait. If there's anything new, I'll drop by Grandma's. Thanks for the goodies. She's always spoiling the old man. What are you, an old man? You'll give the young ones a head start, won't you? And shaking hands, the neighbors parted. Michael opened the door and from the doorstep heard the smell of his grandmother's famous PR. She at his place always cooked her signature delicious and grandmother's pie. Smells like from the doorstep. Why'd you stay late at work? Oh no, I stopped by my neighbor Benjamin's. But they're to talk and I was going to talk to the old fella about something. Mom, don't coach. No one's safe from jail or prison. We all could be, just like in my alms house, by the way. And the guy threw his backpack on the hall table and went to the bathroom to wash his hands. When he came out, he went into the kitchen, where breakfast was already on the table. Mom, I don't want any. I ate at work, but tea and cake would be great. Michael didn't tell her that he'd had breakfast at the old thug's. He didn't want to make his mother nervous. The woman looked at him carefully, but didn't say anything. Only the grandmother, apparently, guessed where her grandson had eaten, but shook her head, said nothing. Grandson. But I just put the pie on. We'll be ready only in half an hour. In the meantime, bear with me. All right, I'll help Siberia in the meantime. One boy nodded his head and gave his grandmother a peck on the cheek and went back to his room. Michael spent these days at home, waiting for information from Benjamin, but he was silent. They crossed paths in the yard a couple of times, but the neighbor only said hello and didn't say anything. And the guy didn't really insist. He understood that if he didn't say anything, it was the right thing to do. But on Sunday, Benjamin decided to check the familiar basement and take the camera. He didn't tell his neighbor about his plans. He decided to take the tape first, see what he had, and then act according to the situation. Late at night, Benjamin, as he did the first time, went to the cellar door and looked around. Everything was quiet, but the silence was deceptive. Come on, he had to go get the camera anyway, and he slipped downstairs, opened the greased door, and froze on the threshold. The man listened carefully to the sounds, but the silence was sepulchral. With quiet shuffling steps, Benjamin approached the very last door, orbited it, and varnished it and lifted it. At the keyhole he listened carefully. Quiet. So the studio is not working for its intended purpose today. That's fine, no one will interfere. Quickly removing the camera, Benjamin headed for the exit, and just as quickly went out and closed the door as he came in. But as he passed the women's quarters, the man didn't hold back. He walked over to one of the dimly lit windows and peered through it at a bed and a dark-haired woman sitting on it. A woman dressed in a short dress with ribbons in her hair. Yes, thought the man. Another victim. How did I get the camera in time? He mentally pitied her because he knew what would happen next. But on the other hand, what could he do now? Nothing. Once outside, Benjamin walked home as before, pondering what he would see on the tape at home. He inserted the flash drive into the TV. The man began to watch the video, and what he saw there only confirmed his suspicions. And the worst and most disgusting, he angrily turned off the TV after a few minutes of watching, threw the remote on the couch, and went out onto the balcony. Yeah, that was to be expected. Okay, now we can show Alex all of this. And then let him think how to deal with these creatures and tell Kathy about it. Benjamin smoked a long time to calm down, and understandably so. Seeing all that filth, although he is a thief and experienced, has seen a lot in his life, but such a man has always respected women. But how do they even do it? They're sick women. It's unthinkable. And he couldn't find an answer. What's there to say? Mental illness must have its own degree of variance, or maybe it's congenital. Who knows? Benjamin threw the cigarette butt down and went to bed. What was it though? Even after a couple of minutes of watching, he was shivering. But apparently, fatigue and emotion took over, and the man fell into a deep but restless sleep. Already, in the morning, Benjamin was on duty on the balcony to look for Michael, who had to return from work. And when he appeared at the entrance, he called him and gestured for him to come up to him. Uncle Benjamin, anything new? Yes. Not on our honor. Remember I told you I put a camera in the basement? Benjamin nodded and beckoned him into the hall, turned on the video, and let him watch. It was filmed by Michael. The orderly was horrified to see the head doctor and his cronies having fun with sick women at night. He certainly did not expect such a thing. The boy closed his eyes and quietly said, "Turn it all off." Benjamin did not argue. It was really disgusting. He sat there and didn't know how to go on living with it. Opening his eyes, he looked at the landlord and asked if he had anything to drink. He nodded his head and took out a bottle of vodka from the bar. He hadn't been drinking for a long time, but he always had alcohol just in case, and now he put a glass of white vodka on his neighbor's face. He held it out and said, "Wait, I'll bring snacks." But Michael did not wait for an appetizer, but drank the vodka in one fell swoop and sniffed it with his sleeve. At that minute, the host entered the room with a slice of sausage and cheese, but the guy nodded his head negatively and said, "I can have some more vodka, but at least you're behind the ring." Benjamin poured, sat down next to him. Michael drank this glass in one breath, and now he took a snack and looked at the old thief attentively, talking about what we'll do, what we won't do, and what you'll do. I already thought to show to whom it is necessary to give a report to their own, and I will wait what they will tell me. But I think it won't take long to get a reaction. I also asked you here on purpose. I want to warn you that there may be some serious inspections at your clinic in the near future. I'm aware of that. I hope everything's legal and these assholes don't get away with it. Don't worry, they won't. You tell me, how's Kathy? How can I tell you? I got the head doctor to let me give her shots, just for show. But I didn't. But then, you see, Uncle Benjamin, she came into the clinic sort of hypnotized. So, she probably doesn't realize where she is. Or maybe it's like, she's in there. And is she really mentally damaged? I hope not. Although we can't rule out that possibility. But now, the main thing is to get her out of there. And then other specialists will deal with her. And Michael nodded his head. He was sober as a glass even after 2 glasses of alcohol. Apparently, the nervous shock did not let the alcohol to work. The guy sat on his neighbor's couch for a while longer, silently leaned back, then looked at the man and said, "I'm going home. I need to be good. Just Michael, I'm begging you, don't do anything on your own right now. Do you realize how dangerous this is? That's one thing. And secondly, you can't do anything on your own. You'll only make things worse for yourself and Kathy and the other." Patience. The boy nodded his head. He realized he was right. And it was stupid and dangerous to take any action now. All he could do was wait. But he didn't wait long. The very next day, he was summoned to work. "Michael, good morning. Is no bothering you? You've been summoned to work immediately." The head doctor's voice was frightened and trembling. "Good morning. What's wrong?" the guy asked. It was just for show. Did he realize what might be going on in his clinic? Nothing yet. Come on over." And the head doctor hung up. "Yeah, that's how you guys got moving." Apparently, the neighbor got the materials to the right place. And now the guy quickly got dressed and started to leave the apartment when he was stopped on the doorstep by his grandmother. "Michael, what are you doing up so early?" the chief of medicine called. "I have to go to work for my shift." "So you didn't even bring any food?" "No, I didn't have a shift. There's something going on, and it's probably an emergency." "Okay." Then he slammed the door, and 5 minutes later he was at work. And what he saw made the guy very happy. A whole brigade of enforcers were crowding around the main entrance. Orderlies and doctors nervously stood and smoked in the distance, and patients were carefully taken out and put into ambulances. Michael approached the orderly Liam and asked Liam, "What is going on?" "Don't you see, OMON, we're raiding and cleaning up, and that someone is selling drugs. Go higher. Someone organized a porn studio in our basement, and they blamed it on our head doctor and a few of his henchmen. That's what it's all about." Michael made a surprised face, but at that very moment he saw Kathy being taken out of the women's building by 2 men and carefully put into a black Jeep. So she really was the daughter of a reputable thief. But thank God she wasn't mentally ill. He looked at her and was startled by the hand on his shoulder. "It was you, Michael." The voice was commanding and quiet at the same time. He turned around and saw a man dressed in an expensive suit. He immediately realized that he was either one of the highest representatives of the government or a criminal authority. Michael nodded his head and only wanted to ask, "Who are you?" But the man was ahead of him. "I'm Alexander, Kathy's father. Benjamin, your neighbor, told me everything about you, about your help. So thank you for bringing my daughter back. You're welcome. I know it doesn't have to be this way. It's mean and wrong. Kathy's gonna be okay." The man nodded his head and looked at the boy carefully. But he didn't say anything. And what could he say if he didn't know anything about his child's condition? But God willing, everything would be fine. He just nodded his head once more, thanked him quietly, and turned around and walked to his car, which immediately sped away. As soon as he closed the door, Michael stared after him for a few minutes, reflecting on the situation, and at that moment the chief doctor and his associates were being loaded into the truck. It was all over. Michael did not notice how his neighbor Benjamin quietly approached him and clapped him on the shoulder. Now all the members of the Corps de Ballet have been captured and sent to places not so remote. Believe me, my contacts will make sure of that. And Kathy, it was her dad, but in a black BMW. Yeah, I think she'll be fine. And you, neighbor, thanks for pulling her and the other women out of that bondage. Michael raised an eyebrow, perplexed, not really understanding what the neighbor was saying, but he immediately clarified. You see, Kathy isn't the only healthy woman in this almshouse. Many beauties were just grabbed on the street and brought here under the guise of one or another mental disorder. And what was done to them next? You know what I mean. Now the shop's been shut down. And a special big thank you from my friends. The neighbor patted him on the shoulder and went home. And Michael stood on the street and smoked for a long time, realizing that there could be a great number of such clinics all over the country. After all, there will always be people like his chief physician, the chief of police, prone to such entertainments. But now, Michael realized that there was one less clinic of debauchery, and it was his direct merit. He walked home and thought about how a person's fate can turn out. Even take Noah, the head doctor, a respected man, and an excellent specialist. But something drove him to such a crime. Kathy is the daughter of a wealthy father, albeit with a criminal record, intelligent and beautiful. She had suffered at the hands of non-humans who could simply stab her with drugs to the point of being a vegetable. But that's all in the past now, and his town can breathe easy. Oh, Michael, you got home from work so fast, lady. How's Grandma's pie cooking? The grandmother looked at her grandson and realized everything on his face. She smiled and put her specialty pie on the table, pouring her grandson some tea-flavored tea. The woman knew that now everything would be fine in this town, and certainly no one else would get hurt. And all of this was due to her grandson. She was proud of him, as any grandmother would be. After all, it is probably right to say that one loves one's grandchildren more than one loves one's own children. Betty smiled, and after patting him on the head, sat down on a chair and carefully washed her specialty pie with doctors like him flying in both cheeks. One could be calm for every patient, for everyone.